Thursday, May 28, 2015, and it is 12:10 p.m. We're in the City Center Conference Room at 351 West Center Street in Provo, and our Chair Garrett will be here shortly. So we'll start with a roll call, starting with
Corey Norman,
Alan Moore,
Kate Andrew,
Kim Santiago,
Dave Sewell,
Gary Winterton,
Callie Hales,
Matt Taylor, Brian Jones.
Louise Jurgensen. Thank you. And would ask George Stewart if you wouldn't mind giving us the opening prayer. Put him on the spot. I'm not sure who was assigned.
Our dear Father in heaven, we are so grateful for this opportunity to meet together, and we ask for thy Spirit to be with us and might guide and direct our thoughts and our actions, that we might do what thou would have us do for the good of this beautiful, wonderful city that we live in. We ask you to bless our city council members, that we have thy Spirit to be with them, to guide and direct them in all their activities, and they might again do what thou would have them do at this time. We ask you also to bless our families and loved ones, Father. We know many are suffering and have special needs, and we ask a blessing on these people also, and do this in the name of our beloved Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So we are in the throes of budget analysis right now. Budget has to be finalized and approved by June 16th. And so we have taken this extra work session to discuss some of the analysis that staff have done for us over the past few weeks, and to be able to have some good discussion with council members, so that we have an idea of where the council is, and then just to get information, opportunity to ask questions and clarify. And we do have members of our budget committee. Mr. Larry Walters and Mr. George Stewart are here, and Mr. Walters will have to leave after an hour or so. We appreciate him being here, and so we do have questions for the budget committee. We welcome those. And we'll begin with a discussion on proposed recreation, arts, and parks wrap tax. And Mr. Taylor will begin, and then Bryce will take over.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago. It's been a pleasure this last couple of weeks to dive into the budget and to do some independent analysis of the mayor's proposal to the council. I just want to give some preface to our reports. One for council members that may still a little be hazy. What does staff do and what's their role and function? But mostly for the public or for the administration. Sometimes I get questions even from different members of the administration. Well, why do you do what you do, and why are you challenging or looking at our proposal? We're professionals. We made a recommendation, and we respect that, and we honor them as in their roles. And so none of this is to challenge the the professional recommendations of the mayor and his administrations. It simply comes down to sort of the job duties that have been entrusted to me, and by extension the rest of staff. And I base that off of city code, where one of my duties, amongst many, is to coordinate all council activities related to the analysis of the city budget, including but not limited to its review and adoption by the council. And further, to evaluate, report, and make recommendations to the council as whether the general intent of council policies in the forms of ordinances and resolutions are being complied with and carried forth by the city, in order to determine whether additional ordinances, resolutions, or policies are required. So it's with that intent that we produce this work. And ultimately, though, we do have a framework for thinking about our work. I've shared an email, I believe I shared it, I hope I did, with the council earlier this month about our approach to our work. We do use a model for thinking about these issues, and you'll see that shine through in our work as we first try to define what the real problem is we're trying to solve. Now, that's very important to us, because how you define the problem affects how you may answer it. And so we do spend some time trying to get to the core issue when we talk about these issues. Part of our framework is also to establish the objectives. Now, recognizing the council is the policymaker and has the sovereignty of the people upon them, it's our view that the objectives are determined by the council. And we derive those usually through statements that the council has adopted, whether that be intent statements, Vision 2030 statements, general plan statements, other statements, master plans, and so we try to gather those to be the framework or lens that we look at these issues. The next step in our analysis is evaluate alternatives, and certainly there's always the alternative. The primary alternative that we're looking at is what the administration and mayor has proposed, and each of those alternatives. However, we do brainstorm some other alternatives just to give the council an option for dialogue, to bring some things onto the radar that you may not have considered before. Ultimately, with each of those alternatives, we try to look at consequences, try to look at trade-offs, some of the cost-benefit analysis. It's pretty exhaustive work, as you can see by these reports, written reports, to try and capture the essence of our discussions. Ultimately, though, our approach to recommendations is that we don't ever come out and say this is our recommendation. We may say, well, this alternative seems that it may achieve most of the council objectives, but it's ultimately the council to decide what actually captures your objectives or not. And so we fall short of actually saying we recommend X, Y, or Z. But occasionally we do see alternatives that seem to more closely align with your alternatives or not, or objectives or not. So just with that preface, and again, shared for the public as well as others that may question what we do and why we do it. We also have, our approach to the budget review has we've done a general look over the budget. Ryan and Bryce and our interns, Rachel and Carolyn, have delved into the budget. We've asked a lot of questions. John Borgett and Denise Roy from Finance have been more than generous and kind with their time to help us get our questions answered. Many of those questions are more nuts and bolts, administrative, to help us understand how this works and that, and not necessarily things that we'll be reporting back to you on, although we are going to produce a summary of those questions and answers. Some are higher level policy questions, and then we'll bring those up in the course of specific issues. So far, we've been able to do substantial work on the RAP tax proposal and utility rate proposals. We released, we're getting closer to releasing a property tax. So we actually know that one out yet. That's been not the report, but an intro to that report. There's about 4 or 5 more that we're programming for next work session on Tuesday, and they sort of descend in order of magnitude or impact on the budget. And so we try to reserve most of next Tuesday for more in-depth budget discussion for you. Our approach to today's meeting will just to report verbally on some of the key elements of our work, but we hopefully schedule enough time to allow you a discussion about the relative merits of the mayor's proposal and any other information that we may have brought up to you. We hope that out of today's retreat or work session and Tuesdays that you'll be able to determine some outcomes that you would like to see for the final public hearing on June 16th. And so with that, any questions of me before I turn to Bryce? Okay. I want to thank really quick Karen, Bryce, Ryan, Rachel, Carolyn, Louise. This all been a team effort this last few weeks just to really push out as much as we could. Karen's even had a little bit of fun with giving us some fun with funding buttons, and hope you've enjoyed the video series. And we've also, I want to highlight Karen's infographic, as we try to simplify and break down in the most simplest term the mayor's preferred alternative to approaching RAP tax. Yeah, but Bryce will go more into that.
Okay. Thank you, Matt.
All right, thank you, Matt. Thank you, members of council. We wanted to discuss the RAP tax and kind of go into some of the things that, the decisions that we're looking for long term. But first, we wanted to break down some of the mayor's proposals. So just a quick overview. On May 14th, the mayor, well, the Park and Rec staff came and presented the mayor's proposal to you. And the mayor's proposal established a funding plan to essentially address the funding limitations related to aging infrastructure, new facilities, visionary projects, and art expansion. And so we are in the midst of really, we have to make a few timely decisions. Number one, do we do a RAP tax? The reason this is important is there's a couple of factors that go into this. The budget currently has a RAP tax in it. And so if we're not going to do a RAP tax, we need to remove that money and the things that were funded through that RAP tax. You know, if the council's interested in those things, we need to find a funding alternative. Also, we need to get a resolution. Well, we have to request a resolution of intent from the county, and we have to request that by the end of the month to give them enough time to submit a resolution of their intent to either collect a RAP tax or not collect a RAP tax before we can put that on the ballot. So
By the end of
by the end of June.
Or the end of June. Okay.
Sorry, I meant
End of next
I'm already in
That's
June.
fine.
And so, and then the other decision is that when the administration came, they talked about the importance of having some type of funding plan in place. And if you have a funding plan in place, it shows the residents where that RAP tax is going to go. And so the administration has requested that we have some type of funding plan associated with the RAP tax. So if we do choose to do a RAP tax, we also need to establish that funding plan. That the funding plan is not near as timely as the RAP tax decision, but it would need to be decided in the next few months. And so, I just wanted to provide some background of the Parks and Rec expenditures over the last 6 years, and it also included in this graph is the FY 2016 budgeted revenues. And so, if you have two reports in front of you. One is a Parks and Rec 10-year CIP adoption. The other is a RAP tax policy analysis report. The reason we split these out is because we felt like the RAP tax was a singular decision, and it should be looked at from just by itself. And so we took out of the 10-year CIP plan that the Parks Department proposed a RAP tax analysis and included that in a separate report. So if you open your Parks and Rec 10-year CIP plan to page, looks like page 4, you'll see this graph. So if you wanted to look a little closer at some of the titles, but you can see over the last 6 years and even budgeted for this year that the bottom line is parks, and parks got a lot of attention, and then the recreation got a lot of attention in those 2 years, and now it's kind of balanced out, whether it's an even mix over the next, over the last year and then next year. And one of the areas that is a little bit smaller is the arts expenditures, and so that's something that we took note of when we did this. And so, as part of the mayor's proposal, he has proposed 2 proposals. One is a bonding option, the other is a non-bonding option. And so we wrote down the spending of the proposed 10-year CIP spending for each of these options, the bond option and the no bond option. And really, they're pretty close to the same. The only primary difference being that capital new projects in the bond option is $14.9 million, and capital projects on the non-bond option are $16.71 billion, but the rest of them are generally fall within about $100,000 to each other. And a graphic representation looks like this, and you can see the slice of the pie is a little bit bigger on the non-bond option for capital new projects than it is on new projects for the bond option. And so the primary difference between these two is where the money is going to be spent from the RAP tax. And so we went back and we looked at the RAP proposal, and the mayor has 2 options, and this is why we say bond and no bond. As part of the RAP tax, the administration.
Right, I just want to, I don't think we can stress enough. Keep in mind the big picture of what the administration's proposed for the whole CIP funding. So, I mean, they're going to draw on various sources, impact fees, land sales, to complete this, you know, and RAP tax is a component to complete this big picture. If you don't have that big picture in mind, it's much harder to understand why they're proposing what they're proposing with the RAP tax. Not to say that can't be changed, it's just kind of thing that puts in a context. Because some people will ask, well, why are you not proposing new facilities with a RAP tax? Well, if you take a step back, look at the big CIP funding strategy, new facilities are coming online. And that's why the RAP tax is funneled towards other things that these other sources can't pay for. I just really want to emphasize that because it helped us get our arms around this issue.
And I'm gonna talk a little bit more about the RAP tax. The big picture. I just wanted to kind of get into the primary difference between the two proposals, and that deals with where the RAP tax money is going to be spent first on a bond option. So we'll take the revenues from the RAP tax and we'll bond against those revenues, and what we're expected to get about $10.56 million from that over the next 10 years, with about $2 million going towards bond fees. And so that's the primary difference between the two proposals, is the $2 million in bond fees is being spent on parks projects here versus bond fees on the RAP tax proposal. And so some of the things that we discussed is that the RAP tax bond, it'll have immediate citywide impact. And so you'll be able to have a lot of projects done across the city and probably a more visible impact from the RAP tax. Potential cost savings, because they can group some of these projects, multiple projects into for one contractor to do, that could potentially save us some money in the long run. Some of the things that the cons from this is a negative connotation with bonds. If you remember from the road bond discussion, when we talked about doing the road bond, a lot of residents were concerned about spending that extra interest. And then if we do this bond, it would be 2 parks and recreation bond, and there could be a perception of, we're not planning well enough or something like that. So if we do the non-bond option, we get $12.6 million, and it would cause a delay of projects because the projects would be spread out over 10 years instead of initially in the first 3 years. It would definitely delay. And then based on the construction cost index, I don't remember if you remember them talking about the cost of construction going up at a significant rate over the last 10 years. That could actually, it may be more worthwhile to bond, just as a result that we would lose, it would cost us more to do some of these construction projects in the long run than it would if we were to bond for it up front. So with that, this is the breakdown of the spending for the bond option on the RAP tax proposal versus the non-bond option. And there are a few differences in this graph. Primarily, the capital new projects for the non-bond option are $3.2 million, versus the bond option, there's no spending that's proposed for new projects. And then the Parks Department, parks projects, $4.2 million for the bond option versus $2.8 million for the non-bond option. So this is from, we broke down the analysis that they did on where they would spend that CIP, those CIP dollars over the long run, and this is just relating to the RAP tax. And this is what it looks like from a graphic standpoint. The capital projects take up a much larger chunk there, obviously, because there's none in this one. So, but the upgrades and replacements on the bond option, a large chunk of those RAP tax dollars are going to replacements and upgrades for the capital. Those are restroom facility replacements. Those can be the Provo River Parkway upgrades and things like that. And then there's some money that's given to other parks projects, and then the arts, both of them, isn't that thing. And so we wanted to kind of talk about some of the policy questions related to the big picture 10-year CIP plan. And so the first question is, do we bond or do we not bond? And then next, what are the council's comprehensive priorities for directing expenditures towards arts versus parks and recreation? And if the council moves forward with the new parks projects, where should the funds for added operations and maintenance costs come from? And more to come on that. Are there specific elements of the CIP proposal that the council would like to alter in order to favor their preferences? So are there some areas you'd like to take away from and add to other areas on the distribution? Can an alternative funding source be identified to fund capital upgrades or replacement? It seems like what the parks has done is they said they have a lot of needs for their capital upgrades and replacements, and so they've essentially identified the RAP tax as the source to do that. And is it the desire of the council to make the RAP tax a funding source for future and long-term capital upgrades? And so there's a potential we won't get that RAP tax passed again in 10 years. And so if that's the case, do we have some other long-term funding source that we've identified? Finally, should some of the RAP tax dollars be supplanting general fund dollars to establish a more sustainable parks and recreation funding plan? Maybe supplant some of the dollars that are currently going to the Cubby Center with some of the RAP tax. I don't know if there's a lot of traction for this, but we felt like it was a policy question simply because the Budget Committee seems interested in that type of route. Next, we want to talk about alternatives for this big picture 10-year CIP plan. First alternative we identified is we can accept the mayor's proposal as is. If we do that, we need to make a decision on a RAP tax, and then we have to identify whether we want to bond or not bond. And so it goes back to the initial two questions that we talked about.
Is the mayor's proposal to bond in that? Is that?
I think that his proposal is to bond, yes.
Okay, so
It's the preferred option there is my understanding.
The second alternative is to identify more funding for the arts. Council can identify a project list, and they can remove some of those projects from the CIP and give some of that money to arts, or they can ask the administration to do it. Also, Parks and Recreation requested that if more money is requested for arts, the council identify where they would like that money spent. And so that could lead to a more hefty policy discussion regarding arts. Finally, less funding for new capital projects. The Council Budget Committee has expressed concern with the new projects due to the increased operation and maintenance costs. And those operation and maintenance costs are captured here. Its totals about $389,000 over the next 10 years that would be added if all of these projects were completed based on their analysis. And so that funding for these capital projects comes from impact fees, CDBG dollars at $3.3 million, and property sales about $2.8 million. And so is the council interested in reprioritizing those projects? Excuse me. And basically limit new capital projects to that $9.3 million from impact fees? That's a potential consideration and alternative. So now, with that in mind, we want to talk a little bit about RAP tax policy questions. Specifically regarding bond and no bond, and then we have a few general questions at the end. First question is RAP tax or no RAP tax? And if we decide to make that decision and go with a RAP tax, is it in line with council's interest to do a revenue bond against RAP tax dollars? And is the proposed RAP tax distribution that's shown here in this graph, 55% goes to park capital upgrades and replacements, 40% will go to trails upgrades and additions, and the final 5% goes to arts programming. And so what is the council's policy in relation to bonding for capital upgrades? And will proposing a revenue bond put the November ballot proposition in jeopardy? Those are some of the policy questions that we developed as we looked at the bond option. The no bond option, again, RAP or no RAP tax decision is at the top. And is the proposed RAP distribution for the non-bond option appropriate, with 48% going to parks, capital upgrades and replacement, 23% to trails, facility upgrades and additions, 25% to new parks projects, and 4% to arts? And if the cost advantages of a bonding and non-bonding option are equal, what are the advantages and disadvantages of waiting for the projects to be completed over the 10-year period? So, is it more beneficial to do it upfront, and in the long term, where we have to postpone some of those projects, is that more detrimental due to the cost? That's a policy question for the council. And finally, if the council moves forward with this option, where should the funds for the new added park maintenance and operations costs come from? And the final general questions that we had is, can an alternative funding source be identified to fund capital upgrades and replacements? We're looking at, a large sum of money that's going towards some of these capital upgrades and replacements, and if we don't do the RAP tax, is there another alternative that we could find? And should other eligible activities such as art programming get more consideration? It was brought up in the last work meeting that there should be maybe some consideration to that philosophy. Should some of the RAP tax dollars be supporting general fund operations and maintenance funding? And finally, if the council moves money to other eligible activities, such as art programming, is there a particular activity in the arts arena that they'd like to see funded? Few alternatives for the RAP tax. Status quo, we can do nothing and not have a RAP tax. Some of the potential considerations are deferred maintenance costs. It's not likely that we would identify a funding source in a timely manner, so there'd probably be more deferred maintenance. And however, there's no risk of
Capital
defense.
upgrade or replacement costs.
Yes, capital upgrade and replacement costs, I'm sorry. And then there's no risk of dependency. One of the concerns of the Parks and Rec Department is that if we put money in certain places, some groups or some members of the city are going to become dependent on that. So that would status quo would mean there's no risk of dependency on those dollars. Bond or no bond, one of the considerations is their public support for a bond. And we talk a little bit more about that in the report. More funding for the arts from the RAP tax. Capital upgrades and replacement projects would likely have to be delayed if the council wanted to go with this option, because most of the money at least in the bond option is going towards capital upgrades and replacements. And so those things would likely be deferred if we were to take some money away from those projects and put it into arts. And it may require a more robust policy discussion regarding arts in Provo City. Council member preference. The idea here is to have the council members all indicate through some type of vote what percentage they'd like to see go to recreation versus arts versus parks. And then we tally those numbers, and that would be the final distribution that would be determined. There is some potential risk that if the council does do that, and that vote is made public, that some of the groups associated with some of the arts or recreation or parks, if those funding amounts were changed, there might be a little bit of an upheaval from that standpoint. And finally, use RAP tax revenues to supplant the general fund. Covey Center Golf Course and a few other areas are subsidized by the general fund currently. You take these RAP tax dollars and pay for those subsidies, and it frees up money from the general fund for us to use for maintenance if we'd like to do that, or other areas. And so it could be a difficult process to explain. So finally, we had one additional conclusion that staff came up with, and I guess I should have mentioned beforehand that really our list of alternatives is not meant to be a comprehensive list. There's probably a lot of other things that could be considered, and you could actually combine some of the things. And that's kind of what council staff did, is that we've thought a potential alternative could be to support the list of projects on the bond list distribution for RAP tax. So say we're going to do the bond list of projects, but we don't bond, and we take those $2 million in bonds and fees and provide some funding for the arts, and we could find some money maybe to supply general fund if that's an interest of the council. And we limit new capital projects funding to the money from impact fees to reduce necessary operations and maintenance costs in the future. Because we're doing fewer new parks projects, we'll have fewer operations and maintenance costs moving forward. And I discussed this briefly with Roger to reprioritize the project list for CDBG and property sales to be used on capital upgrades and replacements. He's not sure that there's projects that we can use those monies for in upgrades and replacements, but if that's the desire of the council, he said that they could look into it. And so all of these options would require the Parks and Rec Department to readjust their list of projects and to identify a timeline for the completion of them. So with that, that's our presentation on the big picture and the RAP tax. We want to give you some time to discuss, and hopefully, we can get a decision made in the next, either at the end of this meeting or the next meeting, of some type of official action that indicates where you'd like it to go. But we do have a pretty firm deadline of the 16th of June, right? We could hold a special meeting.
Unless you want to do a special meeting to decide what you want to do with RAP. But we programmed this retreat to go till 4 o'clock. The intent was to at least give you an hour on each of RAP and utility to discuss freely amongst yourselves. So there is no need to get on to the next item right now. And so with that, Right, turn time back to the chair.
We'll be available to answer questions.
Mr. Chair, you may have considered this already in your last leadership meeting, but given Matt's mention that Dr. Walters will only be here for the first hour of the meeting, and given that the update by the Council Budget Committee is the third item on the agenda, and therefore, given what Matt just said, unlikely that we would be able to call on him, is there any reason for doing so at this point?
Thank you, Mr. Miller. So Dr. Walters, you only have till 1 o'clock?
Yes.
I think it would be great to take advantage of the next 20 minutes then while you're here, and we could either ask any questions relative to any of these issues, ask for your input, or if you had specific things to comment on before you have to leave, Dr. Walters would be happy to have you do that.
The issue is, Hal's raising here is this fourth item about whether the council decides to retain Mr. Walters for a contract work. And so if you had questions relative to that specific initiative.
Actually, my concern was about the third item.
Oh, third item. Okay.
Yeah.
Misunderstand.
Although they both relate to Dr. Walters, yeah.
If there was a specific question before.
Questions for Dr. Walters, or we can turn some time over to you relative to the update you met on Tuesday? Wednesday?
Well, we met on Wednesday, and Dr. Walters was not there, but he, did you have something you wanted to share, or would you like us to ask our questions if we have them? What's your preference?
Well, I don't have a prepared presentation, but I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts. I think the biggest questions I have in my mind are around the utility rate increases, which are very substantial. And I think that the Public Works Department has presented a compelling case for the need for the revenue, but I think that the characterization of the magnitude of the increase may mask some important questions that the council, I think, would like to have answers to. At least I would hope you want to have answers to. Looking at the average increase or the impact on the average household may mask what the impact is on the full range of households. I think that I'm concerned that our poorest families, the ones that are struggling the most in Provo, are also ones that have a disproportionately high utility bill because the kind of housing they can afford tends to have relatively high utilities associated with it. They're not necessarily well insulated. They may not have the best windows. There are lots of reasons why their utility bills may be higher. And I am concerned that we miss the impact on those households whose budgets are the tightest by looking only at the average. So I would recommend strongly to the council that as you consider the rate increase, you also ask questions about what's the distribution, not just the average, but what's the distribution of the impact on households of various sorts. And I've made some suggestions on how the Budget Committee could facilitate answering some of those questions, but there are some issues about confidentiality. Gary.
And that's what I was going to bring up is Larry's confidentiality is causing some problems unless he's an employee, and that's one of the things we need to check with Mr. Jones on. But Larry's been so willing to undertake a study that can help us answer some of those questions. But he has to have certain information, and we have to figure out exactly how we can get that information to him appropriately.
Does he need to be an employee, or can he be hired as a consultant for a dollar, which he was willing to do?
Right. Yeah.
So
that's fine. And I think if there's questions about this, I think Bob Trombley from the legal office is on his way up because Wayne couldn't be here today. There had been some concerns expressed by the administration about the city privacy policy and how it governs the use of customer billing data, and a couple of other issues. Matt and I had met with Wayne, and one of the suggestions that was thrown out, and I think that actually came from Wayne, but that we talked about in that meeting, was the idea of having Mr. Walters sign a contract that made him actually a consultant to the council, and that contract could lay out some of how those privacy issues would be addressed. And Bob's here now, so I don't know if he has anything. I think Wayne had asked him to maybe come up and be ready to address that issue of how those issues can be.
I have a question for Dr. Walters leaves. Is the analysis that you're proposing one that would be able to inform the conversation about the current proposed budget?
Time is short. That would be the concern. Can the analysis be done in time to inform it? Yes, if the data can be provided in a very timely manner. But it depends on how many hurdles we have to jump through to get the
A
data.
follow-up question is, would your analysis include benchmarking in terms of the ways in which other comparable communities have attempted to solve the problem that you've raised? That is through some graduated fee schedule?
Probably not in the time frame available for this budget, but it's something that could be done over the course of the summer. And I assume that the rate structure could be revisited. I don't think there'd be no intent on my part, at least the initial thinking about the analysis, to come up with a proposal that would actually reduce the amount of money that the utilities would be receiving. I'm looking at something that would be revenue neutral.
I understand.
But it might change the distribution, and I think that's where it would be interesting for the council to understand. If you tinkered with the way the rates are set up, could you generate the same money and minimize the impact on people that are struggling the most?
Great question. Were we talking utilities? Were we talking water, storm drain? Were you going to do analysis on all of them?
Yes,
On each
I
of
think
them?
we need to do it on all of them.
George, and you can maybe help me too. There was some analysis done at one point, wasn't there, as the Energy Board member, that they actually did look at a little bit to some degree on type of households and rate structure.
I can comment on that because in the past, we have put a higher percentage of the increase on the high users or the higher. And there was no plan this time on doing that, which is a question of whether we should be equally putting that increase on everyone, where it could be still, as we've done in the past, place more on the high-end users, which are the people that can afford to do it in most cases.
Yeah, that's the problem is in defining that.
Well, and that very study would help us do that because, and as far as confidentiality goes, as long as there's a contract between the city and Larry, I think, my past experience with contractors, and he's paid something, and he's offered to do it for $1, that's a bargain. Wish I could hire Larry for $1.
I mean, in case I was unclear about that before, I don't think there's any concern from anybody's part about that not being the way to go. The only thing I would suggest is, since the administration had concerns about, since they're the ones that raised the concerns about meeting the privacy policy, it makes some degree of sense that ultimately they get a chance to look at whatever the contract is and make sure that it covers whatever their concerns are.
It certainly would need to cover any whom he might hire,
Right.
so as to have comparable, legitimate access to the database.
Right. I don't think there's, as far as my understanding is, I don't think there's any concern. I think the contract provisions that are desired are all standard contract provisions that just cover non-disclosure of the information to anybody else and using it only for city purposes and things like that.
Beyond that, I have some personal views on the RAP tax and bonding, but I wouldn't presume to speak for the committee on those.
Two of us are here, so I think it'd be interesting to at least a citizen portion to speak for us, each of us speak.
Well, I personally am in favor of the RAP tax. I think it's an important tool to consider in meeting the long-term fiscal objectives of the council. I'm not terribly supportive of the bonding issue. I think that when you put it in the context of all of the other bonds that the city is issuing, it sounds pretty overwhelming. Because we just issued a water bond, we're proposing to issue other public works bonds, and we're just issued a revenue bond to build a new energy center. Just the total package of bonding seems to me to raise concerns about just why do we need to go into so much debt so soon and so quickly. And I think that, especially given the presentation that we've heard today, the same kinds of objectives can be met as we go along. I think the RAP tax is an important tool, but I'm just not as convinced on the bonding option there.
Larry, what are your thoughts about their second alternative when we limit the new capital projects that are coming in to reduce the operations and maintenance in the future?
I do think that it's incumbent on the Parks and Recreation Department, at least in the presentations that I have heard, have said as new parks come online, the operating costs for those parks will be handled in the same way they've been handled before, which is just out of this magic thing called the general fund. And I'm not sure that you can do that anymore. I think that as you plan for a new park, you also need to plan for the money to maintain that park and operate it over time. And if it's going to cost another, was that $300,000 a year?
That's yearly, but it's that's at the end of the 10 years.
Right, but when all is said and done, if their plan is put in place, you need another $380,000 a year. I think it's worth asking the question, where's that money going to come from? And my suspicion, I haven't looked at the analysis carefully, my suspicion is that you may want to reprioritize some of that and give some thought to reallocating some of that RAP tax money to actually operate some of those new parks. But I think it would be well worth the council's time to look carefully at the priorities in the proposal and make sure that you're comfortable with the long-term implications.
Thank you, Larry. Any other questions for Larry relative to the update, other things we'll be discussing today before he has to leave in the next few minutes? Then let's continue with our discussion on the RAP tax then. Yes.
If I could, since we've, unless there's going to be lengthier discussion about it, since we've already addressed item number 4, and Mr. Trombley is here just for that purpose on behalf of the administration.
Right.
Maybe it makes sense to actually go ahead and finish that.
Okay.
And I think what's needed is if it is the council's desire to do that, then all that's needed is a motion from a council member and then approved by the council that it is the council's desire to retain Mr. Walters as a consultant and do so by contract. And then I would suggest, again, just to make things maybe quicker and cleaner, that include having the contract reviewed by the administration so that it contains whatever it is makes them feel comfortable turning the date on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Bob, are you here with information to share or just to respond to questions?
Just to respond to questions.
Okay. Then rather than make you come back in 3 hours, Bob, let's go ahead and discuss that item. Questions, comments? Is there a presentation that's part of this?
I don't know.
Okay.
No, I think
All right.
we've probably discussed.
Okay.
You had some, Kim. I think we've probably discussed the issue already.
Yeah, we discussed it already, and I would like to know if Mr. Trombley, is that, if you have any concerns about the legality, or if there are any
No concerns, no red flags are showing up.
Bob, you can come up here in front if you want.
Stated. I'm sorry.
You can come up here in front if you want.
Okay. Yeah, don't have any concerns. This seems to be something that the administration is behind as well as the council. We want to make Provo a better place.
we're looking for just mostly standard phrasing in a contract agreement. Just, I mean, there is a lot of private data contained here. Make sure that we're all on the right side of grandma and that sort of thing. But otherwise, standard non-disclosure type contractual terms, I think we're good to go.
Are you looking for a motion at this point?
Yes.
I move that we approve the proposal from the Council Budget Committee that Dr. Walters, that a contract be prepared and extended to Dr. Walters that would allow him to investigate further along the lines that he has described and the Council is supportive of, and furthermore that be reviewed by the administration before the offer occurs.
Should we add to include the standard non-disclosure terms? Does that need to be in the motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Miller, a second by Mr. Winterton. Any questions, comments, or other discussion?
If we go forward with that, the information that he provides, how will that affect putting the rate changes in place? Will it delay that for this budget cycle?
I don't think it needs to delay it. You could move forward and then address it anytime during this year to restructure those rates.
So we go ahead and propose rates in the budget now.
Yeah, especially with his proposal to be a net revenue, impact. You wouldn't even have to adjust the budget. You would just be adjusting the rate structure and how it's billed out. Unless, of course, later you did determine there needed to be actual rate change overall. But then when we'd cross that bridge when you come to it.
And I know Larry says he only sleeps an hour a night at that. So if he wants to do it by the earlier, he can get it done. He said there's a possibility, but I don't want to. Again, I agree with. We can adjust this as you get your information, and if it needs to go forward. But did you say that there's a possibility that it might be done before?
Yes.
Yeah.
If I can get the data, it's just a question of how quickly the administration can provide the data.
Okay.
So should we have a time frame on it, or is that something that we?
Well, it's hard to impose a time frame. I mean, for his work, or for
the
data.
it's hard to
Data.
impose a time frame on the administration. I just think we just need to recognize that they seem willing to expedite this as best as we can.
Bob and I can work on getting the contract drafted quite quickly. That'll take hardly any time at all. I can't speak at all to the issue of what it takes to get the data together. I don't know about that. So.
Be asking the chair to execute that contract unless you delegate it.
Okay.
I'd just like to thank Mr. Walters for his very generous offer to do this.
Other comments or discussion? Then I'll call for a vote on the motion. Those in favor? Voting is unanimous. Thank you. And I'll second Ms. Santiago's thanks to you, Dr. Walters, for your willingness to help us with this. So,
Thank you. Look forward to doing something that's useful for you.
thanks.
And you already have.
Yeah.
I'll excuse myself. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So back to the RAP tax. Comments, questions for Bryce or others, or discussion? I guess one point of clarification I would like is relative to the vote in November. Do we have a sense for how likely, if the council approves this being added to the ballot in November, how likely it would be that it would pass? And do we decide on bonding in advance of the election in case it does pass?
You don't have to decide on bonding before the election, but the administration has requested, and they've done some qualitative research where they reached out to a few different cities that have passed RAP tax, and they've got feedback that it's good to have a plan in place before the RAP tax goes to a ballot, so that you can explain to these residents where that money's going. As to your question about do we have a sense, the Parks and Rec Master Plan contains a survey that was completed was probably about 4 years ago, that details that about 66% of the residents were either strongly in support or in support of a RAP tax. And I think Quinn Monson's group last year, Corey, did another survey, and that number was close to 75%. So that had about 1,500 responses. The one from the Parks Rec Master Plan had about 400 responses. And so,
Corey, wasn't that question asked again this year?
It was asked the last 2 years. I just looked at them last night. So the numbers went up. The number increased again from 72% last year to 75% this year. The 75%, when you talk about those numbers, it's the numbers of people who indicated that they would definitely support it and who are leaning that way of support. So it's 75%.
Were there any questions asked about why they would support it? Was it because they wanted new things, or was it because
Yeah,
they
so we asked
felt
them, I can forward this to you, we asked them the previous year, basically, how would you like to program these dollars? And it was pretty clear, and I believe the Parks Master Plan indicated the same thing, that it was, much of it was, we would like to complete our neighborhood parks. That was what, this is what it said in the Parks Master Plan.
Complete and enhance, right?
Yeah, complete and enhance. And so it was the same type of responses that Quinn received. This last year, we didn't ask that question. We asked other questions related to it, but you know, how likely would you be to support if the dollars were programmed directly to the park in your neighborhood, those kinds of things. And so it was all favorable, and folks clearly want the parks enhanced, and what was the other word? Completed and enhanced.
So there were no questions about what we're actually subsidizing already, and this is a needed component for just budget sustainability in the future. It was all about what you could get with it, what new things you could get with it. There was no questioning about what if some of this money went to maintain what you currently have, or to, I don't know, anything along those lines.
Bryce, my question is corollary to the chair's, and that is beyond anticipating that the item might be placed on the November ballot. Will you also present an analysis of the proper stance to be taken should the county place the new gas tax on the ballot at the same time?
Will we?
I just have commentary, and the commentary is it's a political judgment on your part. So I think we're pretty confident that the county has not shown any interest in a RAP tax, and it will not.
Right.
So if past precedent plays out, they'll send us a letter back saying, go ahead, put it on the ballot. Now, what I don't know is about your question is whether they'll put that on. And if they do put it on, my sense is that could affect how people vote for the RAP tax by having two sales tax initiatives on the same ballot.
Although I think that we could easily present an analysis, an easily comprehended analysis that's showing that is essentially a false dichotomy because of the council's wisdom in establishing a utilities transfer fund with the idea that it was elastic.
Yes.
And that any tax-related income would be considered on an annual basis with respect to the size of that.
Yeah, I think that's one way. Definitely, if the council wanted to move forward, and we could certainly do a couple things. One, we could message to the public, yes, you have two sales tax initiatives on the ballot, but should you approve both, the council will be revisiting the gas tax or the transportation utility fee.
I didn't want to take the time here to talk about how that might play out, but only to ask whether you were planning at some point.
It sort of depends on where you want to go, and if the council is very assertive that yes, let's put this on the ballot, then it will be probably a collaboration with the administration how to best message that, and that we would see both measures being successful. And of course, part of that I think is a very good point. To help it be part of the message would be you're going to revisit TUF and possibly reduce that depending on how these revenues play out.
Precisely.
Is the gas tax have the same deadlines as far as filing as we do with the RAP tax? When do they have to have that filed by?
It's the same deadline, I believe. The county has to make a decision end of August to put that on the ballot. And right now, ULCT has sent out a sample resolution to all the municipalities saying, if you would like to support the county and encourage them to do this, here's a resolution you could pass to encourage them to put it on the ballot. So I don't know if anybody's actually passed it yet. We'll have to look into that. But
that's something we'll be taking up, I assume, Mr. Chair, at some point once the budget is.
Yeah, that's not in our last. We talked about it in the last leadership meeting.
No, I mean just in the future.
The resolution
precisely
supporting the gas tax.
They were asking for this year too, though. I mean, they were sort of pushing November of 2015 for that as well, and so.
Certainly, the county could come back and say we're not interested this year and do it next year.
My point is, we may want to think hard about, passing a resolution in support of if they're going to put it on this year's ballot. This was our thought in leadership anyway, and I think it was the administration as well who felt like we have to think hard about that one.
Right.
Is that correct? I mean, that's what I got from.
Yeah, I think I believe it was the mayor, someone from the administration had expressed that they had some concerns about exactly how the tax was going to work, and that we might be in a better position down the road to look at others that have passed it and see how it has worked before.
We are in a unique position because we've taken care of a lot of the problem, and I know that Orem is quite concerned about this and looking forward to those funds, but they're in a different position than we're in.
Well, I don't know another municipality that isn't.
Yeah, exactly.
So the passage of such a resolution is completely optional, and all it really says is we recommend that the issue be put to the voters. It doesn't necessarily say we recommend implementation of the tax because of concerns in the state law about use of tax dollars to support a proposition. It's just a resolution encouraging, it's a draft resolution encouraging making a statement from any municipality to their county to say we think this ought to be put on the ballot. And I think that because most other municipalities haven't found a solution like we have, it's probably going to go on the ballot in several places. But it's just entirely up to the council whether you want to pursue such a resolution or not.
I agree with the statement. The other municipalities are desperately wanting this money, but I think some of them may also be grasping with timing issue on asking the question. I know Lehigh is proposing a RAP tax this year, so they may be asking them the same question. Number of questions on the same ballot and so forth. I don't know how many municipalities are having multiple tax issues on the budget, but we could find that out.
I think ultimately our dilemma is much smaller than that of the other municipalities for reasons already stated. I assume the ULCT resolution would be much like the one we affirmed for purposes of legislative action. It's sort of non-committal in a way.
Yeah, and it certainly be drafted any way you want. They sort of throw in everything in the kitchen sink into the resolution to meet all parties' interests. And if there was parts of that resolution you didn't want to emphasize, you could certainly tailor it in a way that was palatable to this council.
But I think the administration in our meeting mentioned that they wanted that it might be wise to see how Salt Lake fares with the whole thing, and then it might be wise to watch and see how that shakes out.
I remember that point now, but it's brought up.
Mr. Chair, I have a question about going back to RAP tax with the bonding. Let's see, it was the no bonding issue, and I apologize that I don't have my chart. Scott, can you help me? The $3.2 million in new facilities, where was that coming?
Thomas, can you
Yeah, I can-
clarify the classification on them?
Where would that be spent, and why are we, I thought,
So an explanation to that, what, in the bonding option, we initially we obviously had that $8.7 million near the beginning of the term. And we used that to complete, that all went to the trails, the widening, the enhancements to the trail system. In the no bond option, we didn't have that money, so we took some of the impact fee, which we felt was justifiable on the widening of the trail. So we took some of the impact fee there, which then some of the other new parks didn't have that impact fee, so then we in turn infused or allocated the RAP tax to that to complete those projects.
and so what I'm wondering about here is that there's not enough impact fees, is what you're saying then, to cover this 3.2 million? Because, and then what would suffer?
What would suffer?
Uh-huh.
We could look at it.
Is our capital replacement and gonna suffer?
If you look, the capital upgrades replacement number, you've got about $200,000 difference between the two. It would suffer a little bit. But again, this is something that doesn't have to be decided today. We can still go back through and hash this out and still refine that CIP. Because, the projects at the end, some of the new projects like Slate Canyon, project specific, some of those could fall off. One of those could fall off, or it's just, I need some more time, but it would be best to have some time to really refine some things and really hammer it out better. Does that make sense?
It does to me, and I understand that. I know that the budget committee and the council are quite concerned about the maintenance and not the maintenance. Give me the right
Capital
word.
upgrade.
Capital upgrade and replacement.
Those things. And if you can help me with, and those are the type of things that we are concerned about. I think what Scott said in the master plan was we want to keep and improve the parks that we've got before we actually move on. And I know that's a concern of the council. And so as I see that new money coming in from RAP tax, I'm a little concerned, and again, we can hammer it out later. I'm a little concerned that we've got to make sure that we're taking care of priority number one.
Right.
And then moving from there.
Mr. Quick, too. If anyone has questions, the administration put together a proposal that shows 10 years, project by project, where that money is going to be coming from, where it's going, and so we sent that out as part of the report for you. So if you want to look at that, that'll give you a sense of what projects they're proposing to use the RAP tax on.
And I remember that. You don't remember exactly where that 3.2.
The exact projects,
There's
it's
10 projects,
several projects.
And what they do is they split some of the projects between CDBG and RAP, impact fees and RAP tax, all along that 10-year projection. So if you'd like to, I could take some time.
I actually have that chart. I just don't have it with me, and I can't remember.
You have that, or you can put it up?
It's on probably, yeah, I think so. It's hard to see, though. It's a very large project.
While he's getting that, Matt has a
Mr. Chair, if I may,
question.
Mr. Winterton, I think again, it depends on how you define new projects, I think, and we'll know for sure if we can look at that chart. But if I remember correctly, one of the new upgrades on the no bond option is partly the river trail. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, it's part of the upgrade.
Yeah. Is that part of the upgrade list?
But if that's new, I'd sure like to be able to save that for our other.
So here's the no bond.
And use the impact piece for what I consider new.
My other just thought on this is a proposed list, just as sort of general strategy going forward. You might not want to commit to the list too much. It's probably going to need to be sort of a fluid document. So if you go into the communication phase of the RAP and say, yes, we are going to deliver X, Y, and Z, this specifically, that might set you up for problems down the road. Oh, you didn't deliver here or there, not knowing exactly what turns in the road come your way. It may, as far as a communication strategy, say, we're programming so much of the percentage of funding towards things like X, Y, and Z, rather than an actual specific list.
Unless we bond.
Well, even with the bonding, because that's going to be a little fluid.
A little less fluid, though.
A little,
because we're going to take that money and start spending.
well,
Not necessarily,
Not-
because who knows what future councils will do.
if future councils,
That's
you
just a
also
very short
have
horizon.
the actual details of the bond are going to adjust how much revenue is received. You're going to have variations in sales tax dollars, which will adjust how much revenue you received. Certainly a portion is committed through bonding. You don't have to marry yourself. You don't have to marry the bond to specific projects. And I think it's wise, this is a personal opinion, to probably tell the voters this is what you're voting for in general. But if you get too specific, that's just might cause other problems too. No, that's
Just as a clarification, these projects on this list, these come from the master plan, or projects identified in the master plan. This is how we complete the master plan. I mean, I think with that approach, I think that's, does that make sense?
Well, right.
This is just a kind of top of the head timeline to meet what the master plan is advocating.
Right.
It seems to me, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind my addressing Deputy Mayor Norman Corey.
Oh, we're on first name basis, aren't we, Harold?
That it would be important for any revision of these documents from the administration to address the two issues that Dr. Walters left us with. One is where that operations and maintenance fee charge of $300,000+ annually will come from for new projects. And the second concern that he registered was that is the city overextended in terms of bonding? It would be good to see an analysis of that. My guess is that analysis would be mitigating of most concerns about whether we've exceeded some desired ceiling with respect to bonding.
Mr. Miller, Mr. Chair, if I may, Mr. Borgett is here. And I think he's much more qualified to comment on what you just said, but it's my sense that we're nowhere near our bonding capacity.
I just simply wanted to pass those suggestions to the administration.
I would say
not
that's,
asking.
that's well noted, and that's what I was looking over here at John in the corner, because if you're looking for the technical answer, my guess is John's going to be able to get that. I think a lot of it is going to be different because this is a sales tax, and granted there is some bonding associated with it, but a lot of that has to do with the messaging and how we educate of what kind of bonding this is. So I mean, there are different stripes of bonds.
But in many cases, the bonds that we have approved recently were accompanied always by an indication from the agency in question that they had already planned for such bonding and had money set aside to offset the cost of debt service and so on. I think that needs to be emphasized as well.
Do you have anything?
I can respond.
Yeah,
if you want me to.
Yeah.
The first thing I would say is the city of Provo really is compared to other cities, our debt is fairly low. It is true what Larry Walter shared is that in the past year, we've issued some water and wastewater bonds as well as some energy bonds. Okay, and so as you look at what's happened in the last year, yeah, we've issued some debt, but as far as our overall debt limit, the way that it's typically measured is general obligation debt. And we're not even a fraction to the limit of what we could incur from a general obligation debt perspective. To me, the biggest question on the RAP tax on whether you issue bonds or not is whether you're going to spend about $2 million on, as Bryce mentioned, in interest. And the question is construction interest going to impact construction inflation? Going to outpace that? I think we tried to be fairly conservative in only borrowing 75% of what's available. So that gives you a pretty good cushion, but whether or not you want to do that, I mean, and the other challenge is you are going to be limited to spending money on new construction on when the impact fees come in. So you're going to be forced to delay that based on when that comes in. But if you want to start on the improvements and work on existing parks that need work and get it started immediately, the bonds provide that benefit.
Thank you. Scott, help me with this one. I've had a couple of conflicting reports back with regard, for example, I'm concerned, we all are concerned where we're going to get this $390,000 for the operation and maintenance of the new facilities. I was told one time that when we did the splash pad, yes, the project went over and they came back to the council, I remember, for a supplemental request to increase because the project ran over.
Was it the actual project or the operating and maintenance?
And I thought it was the actual project, and I thought that the operating and maintenance was actually, I was told that the operating and maintenance we had planned for. This is one of the concerns that we've got, is that we're building new ones, we're creating new ones, and all of a sudden this also presents the bill to us. How are we going to plan for that $385,000? Can you help us that's what Mr. Miller was talking about. Can you help us understand?
Well, I know the Planet Parks, and Thomas can help on if I say it wrong, but we're basically operating our current park system on staffing levels that were the same in the 1970s. So through efficiencies and different ways of managing parks, we've been able to find those efficiencies. And there's been a lot of expansion in parks since the 1970s in Provo, and we have found those ways and those efficiencies to do that. I think your concern is right on in the fact that when we talk about, I mean, we do need to talk about this other side, or we need to be able to say, after all these improvements are done in the parks, are there some efficiencies gained in maintenance and operation in that also that could help go for these new parks and these new elements? So I think it's definitely a great conversation between the council, administration, and the department to talk about what are the effects. The effects of a splash pad are very different than the effects of another park that is built. The amenities that are put in each area has a profound effect too. So that's why each one of these comes down to an individual conversation on the new facility.
If I could just add, typically with impact fees, you get the impact fee itself, and then you have the increase in the number of residents, and so you have an increase in your sales tax and an increase in your property tax. And so I think that those are some of the areas that typically they'll use to fund this added maintenance for Park and Rec, is from the impact fee to build it, and then the sales tax and the property tax increase they expect from it. Most of that money probably will be siphoned over.
Utility transfers. I mean,
Yeah, utility transfers.
Source, each of those new residents that generated the impact fee are going to be paying additional into the city general fund. Yeah, I guess distributed broadly. But
and also residentials don't cover the services that we provide for them anyway. I mean, single.
Yeah, in fact, all of what we're talking about under the purview of the so-called RAP tax are subsidized operations.
That's right.
It seems to me wise to consider this the 10-year bond for once the RAP tax is approved as a means, kind of falling into our laps, a means for dealing with decades of deferred maintenance.
capital.
Yes, decades of deferred capital upgrades and
Replacement.
Yeah. This is really hard.
No, that's exactly right.
So if we go back to that discussion that we just had, how have we been doing it? We've been doing it with those funds, but it hasn't worked, and that's why we're talking about RAP tax, right? I mean, if that really was successful at taking care of those needs, we wouldn't have.
They wouldn't be there.
You wouldn't have
Yeah.
the rap tax saying we've got to have this money to do it, because it hasn't worked. So we can't say, I don't mean to say it that way. Are we being unwise by saying in the future we'll find a way too from these other funds? Because that hasn't worked, and that's why we're at this point. So to say we're going to build new facilities that's going to increase the need in the budget for $390,000, but we'll find a way from these other sources. Well, how
Mr. Chair,
can we
if I
be able
may,
to find a way to
if
those
I may
sources
elaborate
now?
on that thought just slightly, and I think it's a valid point, and that's why we, in our, an alternative is, one of the challenges is you collect an impact fee, and the city collects an impact fee. So the RAP tax has really nothing to do with that impact fee, and the impact fee can be only used for projects related to growth. Now, yes, there's a little bit of debate about is it solely a new project, or is it, can you upgrade a facility because of the impact the growth had on it? But either way, if we don't spend that money, we have to give it back to whoever paid it. So if we don't want to use impact fees to expand facilities because we have this issue, then that's another conversation. What do we do with impact fees? Do we retain them? Do we scale them back so we don't have to keep on adding new facilities? But the RAP tax is only sort of related to that and that problem.
And I look at that $390,000. We don't have to spend that. And the way to not spend it is just to not to create the new parks that we're talking about. And so if we decide we don't want those parks, then the $390,000 goes away. But we still have the problem of the other. So,
We still have the capital facilities that age, and
and that to me is
And we're
why we're
out.
dealing with the RAP tax.
right.
funding.
And that was,
Could I make a comment, if I could, from the committee? And I checked with Larry before he left. I guess, as a committee, citizen members of the committee, we were shocked that the RAP tax was going to go for new facilities. You ask us, as a council, to do this, address the long-term structural deficit in the general fund operating budget. This is what the committee was asked to do. That's what we worked on. We have, between the golf course, the Covey Center, and Winterfest, we have $500,000 in subsidies right now coming from the general fund for those three facilities and events. In addition, almost $750,000 in the ice sheet. So if you took all the subsidies we currently have from the general fund to RAP type activities, we could use all the RAP tax and then help address the structural deficit in the general fund. So do we really want to address that structural deficit, or don't we want to address it? It doesn't seem like adding $400,000 a year in maintenance is addressing the structural deficit at all.
But the maintenance is coming from impact fee growth. And the way the administration's proposed RAP tax would not incur new growth.
None of it would go to new facilities.
At least
way they're
with
gonna
the
pass
bonding
the RAP
option.
tax.
But we're using other money to have the
Yes,
growth.
that's right.
So we're using other money to have the growth. The growth's still going to be there, and the deficit is going to be increased.
That's why I said, if you want to have impact on new growth, you really need to talk about impact fees, because we have to use those money on new growth.
but they're going to use this as a package. So yes, the RAP tax is going to take care of this, but look at all these new parks we're going to do through impact fees. And so if we do all these new parks through impact fees, it's all one bundle. I mean, so it is really one message. Yes, we're getting all of these new things.
It's one
through
message
impact
so you
fees.
can understand how the RAP fits into it, but it's two very separate discussions and policy issues.
Okay, but if you're making that promise that you're going to provide X amount of parks with the RAP tax, then you got to find a way to fund X amount of
But
parks.
I would just say
down
that
the road.
promise has already been made
What promise is already been
to fund all these new parks through the collection of impact fee.
Well, not necessarily, because impact fees can be used to upgrade our facilities now if you can prove that the new growth.
We'd have, and the council can go that direction. That's not the current policy from the administration. You would have to, again, change how you use impact fees to do that.
But the
And
council
that would
could do
probably
that.
require a study, and I'm saying you can do that, but that's gonna require a study and change of policy direction to do that.
Right. But it seems in line with what our goals are.
And it may be. My point is just saying the current impact fee and how it's been used and structured has promised new facilities since we adopted it 10 years ago.
So,
If I might continue, it's just, as I listen to this discussion, and there's no discussion on long-term fiscal issues that we have facing the city at all. I haven't heard one word about the long-term structural deficit in the general fund operating budget.
That's probably part of our council budget discussion,
I'm just
George,
saying,
the
as
next
I
item.
listen to the discussion on the RAP tax,
yeah.
I was, and I'm speaking for all three of us now, we were in favor of the RAP tax until we heard that it was all going to be used this way and nothing to address the structural deficit. And I think you'll find unanimous from your citizens part of the committee that we're very concerned that the structural deficit isn't being addressed but being added to by the RAP tax. And quite frankly, if that's the way the council goes, I will campaign against the RAP tax because it adds to the structural deficit that you asked us to reduce.
George beat me to the punch. I had Covey Center and Ice Sheet and Golf Course at the top of my page.
Can I have just one
as
thing?
notes to talk about as far as the subsidies and.
We keep talking about the ice sheet at 750. Right now, the Provo City's subsidy for the ice sheet is 174.
Right.
I think we need to make sure we're talking real numbers here, and that is down from an initial. That's only less than half of what it was when it was originally. So like
Right. Well, and I had 174,000. I
But
wasn't
I mean,
planning on saying.
when we're throwing $750,000 out, I think that we need to talk correct numbers.
So that's 670 then, if we're subsidizing the 4 facilities and events.
And
It's still
174.
$670,000 coming in. I think I could structure a question to the voters. Would you be in favor of increasing the structural deficit of the city, long-term structure of the city, by passing a RAP tax?
That's not leading, is it, George?
Well, the question you ask, the results you're going to get are going to be dependent on the question you ask.
So the RAP tax is not going to contribute to the general fund issue.
Well, if
It's
the RAP tax is used to do something else, and we use the impact fees to do new parks, it will, literally.
And our staff report addresses those as alternatives.
Yeah, and I congratulate the staff report, but it just hasn't been talked about at all. From the citizen committee, we think that's, as far as the distribution of the RAP tax proceeds, which we'd love to support, is dependent on how it's used. And there's a concern, certainly from the three of us, on how it's being used. And because it isn't addressing what you've asked us to address, and that's the structural deficit of the city. So thank you.
Thank you, George. Okay.
And I think this brings us, we're not here discussing impact fees today, but I think it all plays into this decision because we depend on those.
Well, okay, we wrote 2 reports. One is on the 10-year CIP because how you approach the 10-year CIP is critical to understanding how you're going to use RAP. And so it is all interrelated.
And I don't know how many of you, I mean, I just pulled a permit for a house a few months ago. The building permit fee of the building permit I paid was $2,298, $2,300. The check I wrote out was $15,700. Parks impact fee was $3,088. And then water impact, sewer impact, stormwater impact, street impact, electrical impact. I mean, people are paying these. The building permit's $2,200, and they're paying $15,000, and all these fees contribute to running our city and keeping our streets. And so now we're doing this to new construction, and we're proposing raising the water rates, we're proposing raising the electric rates. All those rates are being raised besides what we're doing here. And now we're talking, we need this RAP tax to make everything work. And I'm really getting the lower burden with it. And yeah, I don't know. I'm struggling.
It may be misleading to say that the RAP tax will make everything work.
I'm sorry.
But I wonder, John, it seems to me consistent with what Mayor Stewart said. that it would be salutary were the 10-year CIP plan to somehow reduce the transfers from their current rates, for example. That would be part of improving the budget structurally. That's not part of what's been proposed, I assume.
It's not part of the RAP tax discussion, no. You're talking about the transfer?
No, I'm talking about the entire package. Those transfers remain at their current rates through that 10-year period of time.
They do right now in our 10-year model that we forecasted, it's based on the transfers staying at the same rates.
So they're not increasing. And that might be one way in which the budget is being improved structurally. That is, if we look at the rate of transfer increase over the last 10 years as opposed to the next 10 years, we would see a decided difference in the percentage of revenue coming from transfers.
Yeah, the only change though that we've had in the transfer rate over the last 10 years, when we went from 10 to 11%, as a result of the road tax finding, and that's been the only rate change in the transfer.
You're talking on the other side.
Subsidies?
Yeah.
The subsidies to the county center?
Yes.
Not the transfers from the utilities.
You're talking about the...
No, I'm talking about the transfers from
The subsidies to the,
Yeah.
to the.
You're talking about the transfer from utilities.
Right.
No, you're talking about.
She's talking about the subsidies to the county center, the golf
No,
course.
no, I'm not
Oh,
talking
okay.
about that.
Yes.
So the fact that there is no indication of that percentage increasing could be seen as improving the budget structure.
Well, at least we're staying consistent and we're not.
Not in any necessarily earth-shattering way, but nevertheless, some improvement.
Yeah, we're getting consistent.
So it strikes me that the improvement that Mayor Stewart is calling for might very well be incremental across a variety of the funds that the council makes decisions for.
Yeah, I think the question that George is bringing up is, does it make sense to fund a portion or all of the RAP tax on current subsidies? You know, is that something that the public would support, or is that something that the council supports? And that's kind of the question at hand.
And I think we're saying a portion, since I've talked to the other two members, a portion certainly should be going to address that structural deficit. And I think that can be sold. I think the concern is it can't be sold. But I think people are concerned enough about debt that it could be sold. A portion of it was going to go to that. But I'm not a marketer.
And I guess one of the only concerns that I've got with it, I appreciate where they're going at that, but then at the end of 10 years, where will we address the funding that we've been taking out of the RAP tax to get to those things that we are subsidizing? Will they become dependent on that RAP tax subsidy? That's a question, and I'm not sure we can address it in 10 years. If we need to do that.
I personally think it's healthy to have that discussion now, but subsidy is one of those ugly words that may mislead. It's not unlike our subsidizing downtown Provo, Inc. Well, we fancy ourselves actually a member of Provo Downtown, Inc. And the funds that the council allocates to that organization are meant as an indication of our pledge as a member to see it succeed. And my sense is that when it comes to arts, recreation, and parks, to say that we're subsidizing them might be better said that we are pleased to contribute to them, given our sense that they do great good in our community. And to expect that they would somehow pay for themselves, or God forbid, even return a profit, I think is to miss the mark. These are amenities for the for the vitality of the community. And we pay a pittance in terms of budget for those amenities in terms of the extraordinary good that they accomplish.
I'll speak for the committee. I think we feel the same way you do. These are very important things that are being done. It would just be nice if it could become some of the need that those four activities have could come from the RAP tax, and then we don't have to raise revenue from for the general fund through taxing or fee increases or whatever. So I don't think there's any intent on any of our parts to diminish the value of those, or that we should eliminate them at all.
Nor have I sensed that from many.
So as I kind of look at it, big picture, I'm supportive of the RAP for lots of reasons. And initially it was to help take care of our needs more than it was to build new. And because the needs are great, and the list that we have presented is not the entire list of needs, and that's what we need to remember too, is there are many more needs than what we have listed to be taken care of. And so for me, I want to take care of the needs. I want to use that revenue to take care of what we currently have, maintain what we currently have. And but it's come down to sort of the percentages that I'm really struggling with. I think if the lion's share goes to taking care of the needs, and we have a small percent of something new that we can actually prove that we can maintain that with the RAP tax as well, then I'm good with that. But I don't see us being able to do all of this plus take care of our needs with the RAP tax. And that's how going forward, I would hope that the lion's share of the RAP tax goes to take care of what we currently have. And if we can fit in a new project here or there, then we do that. But that's my preference. And no bonding, because I'd rather pay as we go. I don't want to spend $2 million in paying interest when we could fix Bicentennial Park, or when we could do something else maybe with that money, or we could upgrade what we currently have. We can fix the bathrooms at one of the parks, or we can fix the trail so it's not dangerous and it doesn't have huge issues with it. I'd rather see that money being used for something other than paying interest. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I don't know that I could tell you exactly what that looks like, what one thing we'd be able to maintain into the future. And I think people, I would hope that people would understand that. We can't afford to do a park in every part of the city. And this is maybe the first on the priority list as far as Parks and Recs and the Rec Board, Parks and Rec Board, that's representative of the city. And this is what we feel as representatives of in our districts, that we feel would be maybe the best one to focus on. I don't know if we can even afford that into the future, but I would like to see it go to maintain what we currently have.
So you would be supportive of having the RAP tax on the ballot in the fall. You have concerns about the bonding part of that.
I'd rather not bond, because I don't want to pay money in interest, and I don't know. I don't think we need to build all these things up front to convince people that it was a good idea. I think they understand if we can get the word out. I think they'll understand where we're going with it.
Jerry?
I agree with Kim, and I thought that's what this proposal was for the bulk of, help me with the word,
Capital upgrades and replacements.
not new facilities.
Correct. Right.
That's what I was under the impression of.
But the package, I'm talking about
Well,
the package. And
the package doesn't matter to me.
Well, it
at
doesn't
this
matter
point.
because that's how they're going to present it.
No, well, we don't have to present it that way
Well,
necessarily, because I think that impact fee is we can decide down the road whether we want to use that funds for impact fees. And that'll save us $400,000 on the maintenance. I agree with you. I think that we ought to use this money to maintain the facilities, to upgrade and replace the facilities that we've got. And I thought that's what this proposal was all about.
well, but we're not in control of the messaging or how this, goes out.
Well, we are in control of the messaging, aren't we?
No, not necessarily.
Well,
the administration, when
I'm
they
confused.
told us how they would present this to the public, it was all of these new parks as sort of, let's build it all up front, let everyone know what the RAP tax money is going for, and then we would use the RAP tax to do capital upgrades. But if we're doing this as a package and we're just trading one problem for another.
Well, all we're doing is looking at the master plan.
But, right, but we're doing it up front where we're having to bond and
I don't think anybody, we haven't decided, I don't want to bond either.
Okay, but that's why I'd say no bond. But I also think that let's use impact fees only if we're able to maintain whatever we build. And only use impact fees for improving parks where we know we can improve them and use those impact fees the correct way. I don't think, I don't know, using money and then not being able to maintain it, and then being in the same problem that we're in. I guess that's where I'm having a hard time.
Because if there's not support for bonding, then that probably wouldn't be part of the message that the voters would receive.
I think we should be careful not to dismiss the bond too fast. There was a good argument made for bonding.
And I understand.
In fact, several good arguments made, and they need to be considered.
In fact, I think it's really important to, Scott, I think, would you report on the boards committee, the Parks and Rec boards votes of last week?
You bet. What we had a chance to, and Thomas put together, the difference between paying in interest or paying in construction inflation really turned into a sixes, over the term of it. And our Parks and Recreation Board is just really simplified this, and I think it's a great vision on this. They simplified it and said we support the RAP tax and the uses for upgrading existing facilities and going towards that, and they left that decision. They took the bond. So much discussion has been on the bond, and we haven't even gone to the election yet. I think those decisions can be made at another time, looking at our city status, looking at the interest rate, what's the bond structure, then we can make that decision on another time. And we found through their analysis, the projects can be managed either way. And you guys set the direction, the priority, and if it's a new park, definitely that's a healthy discussion to talk about how that's maintained and whether that is a thumbs up or a thumbs down on that project. That's healthy conversation in appropriation of budgets. That's a good thing.
So Gary, you're supportive also of having this be put to the election on the November ballot?
I am supportive of the RAP tax. And again, I think there is plenty of discussion that we can have on how it's funded and how it fits in with the overall picture. I have some concerns also. I'm worried about where we're going to get $400,000 to maintain that, and we'll deal with that. I understand.
And the thing is, we have dealt with it over time. We have dealt with that part of it.
And I brought up a point the other day that I don't know if this is the right way to look at it as a city or not. I get frustrated. I think I might have had a half a child if I would have had to come up with an exact plan how I was going to get them through college. But on the other hand, I'm not sure that we shouldn't do that as a city. What is our true plan? What are we looking at as we go forward? Have we really got a good plan in place to handle? We need to set up a college fund, whatever it is. I think those are things that are important.
Dave, what thoughts do you have about?
One thing that has occurred to me is it sounds like it would be helpful to revisit the policy where impact fees are going pretty much 100% to new growth with the associated operating expense burden that carries. So maybe we have to schedule a future discussion about allocating some portion of that where we can legally do it to maintaining existing facilities in areas of growth.
Mr. Chair, I also think we ought to, as far as the reasons that I'm in support of this, there are plenty of other reasons that we haven't even begun to touch on as far as why I would be supportive of the RAP tax. And I don't know if that's when the appropriate time is to have that discussion. And I think there's other things that
Well, I think the issue that we'll be voting on is whether or not to put it on the ballot. And then, of course, from that can come thoughts, opinions, discussion about our own support of that individually and as a council.
Mr. Garrett, if I may, the timing is difficult, and when do you make decisions? And so your formal decision to put it on the ballot is end of August, or first meeting in September, I can't remember.
It's going to be end of August.
Yeah, so second meeting in August, you got to make that formal decision. But the reality is, if you're going to have one, the administration or in conjunction with the council, the city will have to come up with a fact-based message. What does the RAP tax do? Now, that fact-based message can be limited to just actual bare bones, it'll raise this much revenue and, and so forth. But it could also include what you intend to spend it on, which is part of the reason why this discussion's relevant now. The other component of timing is if you feel strongly as a council this is the direction you want to move in, 2 months is not enough to really do your public campaign. Now, not your public campaign. If there's a political action committee that wants to support this, 2 months isn't a lot of time for them to really message and get out the message of why this might be a good thing, why this might be helpful. So if you're hoping that the political action committee would have more time, you might want to decide in June or early July exactly how you're presenting the proposal so that this political action committee can appropriately have their message supported on what you're proposing. So yes, technically you can wait all the way to August, but practically, depending on what you want to do, you might want to have this sort of phoned in until earlier.
Well, now you have to also notify the council, right? I mean,
The county. Yes, and so you have to decide by June 17th, unless you want a special hearing, that you actually want to do this, so we can send a letter to the county.
That we want to put this on the ballot.
That you want to put on the ballot. So you have to know by June 17th whether you want to put this on the ballot. The other factors are more just, again, timing and best way to get the message out. And the sooner you know what you would like to propose to the public, the sooner the political action committee can capitalize off that message and go out and do their work.
Okay. Any others want to express their thoughts on their support for having this put on the ballot? I'm hearing some support for that.
I was
Kelly?
thinking with the proposed breakdown of the budget funds, we talked about the arts, instead of calling it a RAP tax, it should be a PR tax or RP tax. Not even put the A in there and then be kind and give the arts $500,000 or whatever you proposed, but to call it a RAP tax completely is not honest when you put it up for a bond. PR tax.
I respect that and understand where we're coming from. I think that we have to consider what our plan is for the arts. At this point, there is no master plan for the arts, and so that's one of the challenges. That's one of the reasons I kind of think the no bonding option is also available, because it gives us an opportunity every year. Well, maybe we need to give a little bit more to the arts. We'd have to review this every year, and I know that's a pain in the neck, especially Orem tells us how miserable experience that is to actually have to do that every year. But it gives us an opportunity every year to reevaluate where we are, where should this money actually be going if we don't bond.
Of course, you'd have that same option if we do.
Well, if we do, except if we spend it up front, then it goes away.
Well, but other funds may become available later as a consequence of that earlier spending.
And there's a possibility of that. I appreciate that, Hal.
Dave?
Just a follow-up comment on the ratio that goes to the arts. I've done just an informal survey through my email list, and I've got responses ranging from, I would suggest you do 15% all the way up to 50%, but I haven't had anyone say that 4% sounds like the right number.
That's enough.
I think we've got to give some consideration to doing something to increase that a bit.
One thing that may be an option if the majority feels that's finding out really where the public is on the arts question is funding a Dan Jones or statistically valid type survey that would flesh out if there's an art preference, where's the priority and how much of this should. So if you needed that, we could certainly work on that path. It would probably cost some money, but obviously cost.
You use Quinn, we've already paid for it. We've already paid for the addresses and such, and so it actually wouldn't cost that much money. couple $1,000 versus $10,000 if you hired Dan Jones.
Just quick, come up with questions.
No, you come up with questions and sit around in a room and figure out what are some of the things you want to find out. And you drill down a little bit deeper. It gets a little bit tricky. I was going to answer your question earlier. It's a little bit tricky adding questions, particularly when we do a survey every year, and we use some of those questions as benchmarks. And so a lot of those are questions that we ask every single year, and they're important for us. They're important,
There's a lot of questions.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how's trash being picked up? What's your satisfaction level of those things? And so we ask a lot of those questions. Then the added question, a couple of years ago, we asked a question related to the care tax in Orem and how they would like the same kind of dollars used here in Provo. And so those are a lot of those questions. We just did not want to get too far down in the weeds and too far down the road, because at that point the response rate becomes less and people just start kicking off.
One of the things that I've learned about Orem Rat Tax is that they are funding through their arts program many private communities like Hale Center Theater and the dance community that's coming in. We'll use our arts to bring somebody to the county center. Is that what our community is looking for? And that's something I don't think we have the information to subsidize some of the private endeavors that are going on. I know that's where a lot of their funding goes. So.
Okay. Well, at this point, we would probably then ask our staff to propose a resolution that we could look at for our second meeting in June. At the same time, we're looking at the budget. This resolution to the county of our intent to add this to the ballot in November, based on discussion that I'm hearing. And how do council members feel about that? Did you?
Here.
Okay.
Need a motion?
Yes, it's always helpful to have a motion.
Okay.
Okay, you're my friend. Help me out here. Where are you coming from? What are you thinking? Any more comments from you? Because I appreciate your comments.
Would you be interested in seeing this go to the voters, Kay, or would your position be opposed to taking even that step at this point?
I'm probably opposed to presenting a rat tax.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So a motion would be good then?
No. A motion to
bring forward a resolution on June 17th. 16th. I keep on saying 17th. I apologize. You get something in your head once, I believe. June 16th to indicate to the county the council's desire to consider placing this on the ballot.
To consider placing,
because you won't actually put it on the place. You won't actually place it on the ballot till later.
Yeah, all you're doing is actually at this point is
just
giving
informing the
notice to the county that they have to let you know if you can't.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Sure. More questions.
Ryan?
I just have a comment. Also, because that'll be the same day we're approving the budget.
Right.
In the budget is the bond for half for the rat tax. So if you want to give direction now as well, that you have to change the budget if you don't want to include that.
Now, did that budget have two proposals? It had two proposals, so one with the bond.
In the budget, the bond option is part of the budget. So they would have to change.
So we would have to change the budget, but that doesn't seem like it'd be hard to do because we already have the alternate plan ready to go.
Now, we just pull the revenue out from the
and
bond
the
and pull the expense out. It'd be real easy to do.
Okay.
So that's, I just think that might.
So we just don't want to approve it if we don't want to approve it if we don't want the.
But if you need more time to think about the bonding option, we could certainly.
You could make
that wouldn't be hard to make that amendment on the fly in the final meeting.
No, the other thing is, if the decision was made to pull it out of the budget and you still decide to bond, just do a resolution, and you're going to have to do a resolution either way. So what the real reason why it's in the budget document right now is just to demonstrate and present to the council the administration's recommendation. But if you pull it out, it doesn't limit you from issuing the bond.
It doesn't affect other parts of the budget, so it'd be easier
Yeah.
to just remove
Yep.
at the time of the adoption of the budget if you're not comfortable with it at that point.
The other comment I would make is, this meeting is titled a work meeting, and in both your June 2nd and June 16th meetings, you are actually holding public hearings on the budget. So there may be some argument that it's better to make those kind of decisions in those public hearings instead of this.
Right.
So right now, we're just looking for a motion
Resolution.
to put a resolution sending a letter to the county.
And that resolution will be voted on the 16th.
So let's want to make that motion?
Yeah, I think Kelly had a comment.
Oh, Kelly, yes.
My question is, the city is looking to place a RAP tax on the ballot. What's holding the county back? Because there's several counties that have a RAP tax. What is keeping our county from going for it?
Well, Salt Lake County is probably the biggest, and they were the first to utilize the RAP. Bryce actually did most of the research. I don't know if you've heard talk about it.
Oh, it's, Utah County just doesn't have a strong recreation presence, and so they haven't ever pursued this, and have given the option. But, you know, Washington County, for example, down south, they have a strong, robust recreation program, and so that county has actually implemented the RAP tax. And I think Salt Lake County has.
Salt Lake has too, and Salt Lake's really sort of a different animal than Utah County. One reason that they were highly interested in a RAP tax is they had areas of unincorporated, non-city developed, substantial areas developed pre-1960, and until the state ultimately changed some of the incorporation rules, and so Salt Lake County got into a strong tradition of providing municipal-like services to unincorporated areas, which included a major Parks and Rec component of the services they provide to, you know, some of the, I can't remember all of them, but like the East Mill Creek and Magna, and, you know, all these little, they call them townships now, but they're unincorporated townships that basically the county takes care of, including recreation, library, and so that was a component of it. Actually, originally when the RAP tax was first conceived, it was primarily just geared towards zoos and performing arts and stuff.
Yeah.
And it failed, and so they added the recreation component. The state legislature added the recreation component to the RAP tax, special option sales tax levy, and then it passed. And so it became it wasn't enough to just support the arts, and at least at the vote at that time, Salt Lake County, when it wasn't enough just to support the arts. They had to bring in a parks component for the public to support it by vote.
So, in relative to that, could the staff pull together some kind of document that shows, starting with the school bonds, everything we've bonded for, and the increase in the utilities, all in one neat little package, so we can look at everything that's coming online and being taxed and added?
Yeah, we can do that. Keep in mind that, again, there's different, I think it's characterized as flavors of bonds. Some affect your property tax, some affect
rates.
A rate or a
Can we break
fee,
it
it's a
down
revenue
so we can
bond.
see exactly where this is going and how much we're asking with 1 year, within 2 years, of people to be taxed and agree to what is being levied against
I
everybody?
just mentioned the flavor issue because, you know, your general obligation bonds actually raise the level of tax on your property, where a revenue bond doesn't necessarily raise your rate. You incur the rate, you're going to collect the money through a fee or a rate change, and then later decide to bond off that so you can get some of the improvements or needs done quicker. Now the cost of that is, you know, the interest, and so how the consumer feels that bonding is very different. One is very perceptible, showing up on your property tax bill. The other types of bond, the revenue bonds, are very imperceptible because they're actually paying that through a utility rate, which may or may not have been collected on the need for bonding.
But it'd be interesting to look at the total package and look at every detail.
We can look at that.
We can do that in a work session, upcoming work session.
It'd be interesting just to see where we are.
Sure.
In our comprehensive annual financial report, in the notes, after the financial statement, there's a note on long-term debt, and it gives you a really nice detailed breakdown. That would just be as of the end of June last year, but we could update that. We'll be doing that for our annual report coming up in June this year, so we could update that, but that's a good place to go back and review it.
There's actually a statement in the statistical section in the CAFR in that same document. It's called overlapping debt, and you have the school district in there also. I think that's what the title of it is called, is overlapping debt.
Yep.
But it's in the statistical section towards the back of the document.
There's also a page in the statistical section that shows what percentage we are of our maximum debt or our legal limit. And it shows, and that's just on general obligation debt, but it will show you what percentage we are, and that's there to give that information to.
So perhaps knowing that there's interest in that, we can spend a little bit of time during your presentation to highlight those sections.
Yes, and we're always happy to bring that to the council on a work session or
Sure,
whatever.
great.
Walk through that.
Great. Sounds great. Okay, so
I'll make a motion then that we ask the staff to prepare a resolution to
Indicate your interest
in
in placing this on the ballot.
in
as a
the
county commission.
that's my resolution.
at the June
At the June
16th council meeting. Great, thank you, Mr. Winterton. Is there a second?
I second.
Mr. Miller? Great. Those in favor? And those opposed? Great, so in favor are Mr. Miller, Ms. Santiago, Mr. Sewell, Mr. Winterton, and Mr. Garrett. And those opposed to the resolution, Mr. Van Buren and Ms. Hales. Okay, any questions, Louise?
Can you do that to me again? I'm sorry, I was just finishing.
Those in favor are Mr. Miller, Ms. Santiago, Mr. Sewell, Mr. Winterton, and Mr. Garrett.
Okay.
And those opposed to the resolution, Mr. Van Buren and Ms. Hales.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we will move to then the discussion on the proposed utility rate increases relative to water, wastewater, stormwater, sanitation, and energy. And Ryan is going to make this presentation for us. Thanks for being here, Scott, and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Guerra, members of council. I will try to make this brief because I know that you all read the report very thoroughly last night or this morning, and so I'm sure that this is just a quick review for you. Before I begin, I just want to, I know Matt already made a shout out to some of the people that worked on this with me, but Carolyn Brown, one of our interns, did a large chunk of the work on this report, as well as Rachel, Bryce, and Matt helped out as well. And then we had a lot of help as well from Jimmy McKnight and Dave Decker. They're both here in the back. If you have any additional questions for them as we go through this report. I actually wanted to start out, I should have put this as the first slide as well, but I'm going to go to the last slide first here. To kind of, these are the first 2 pages of the report, you'll see a list of policy questions. I think there's about 10 or 15 policy questions. But these are the 3 questions I kind of want you to have in mind as I go through this and have your discussion afterward. Is this proposal a reasonable interpretation of how to best execute council policies and objectives? This is actually a question that we ask with every report that we do. Our main question is what's being proposed is a reasonable interpretation of council policies and objectives. Are the proposed increases to utility rates too much for residents to bear? Is there any action the council can take to limit the impact of the proposed increases? We were talking about the RAP tax, and I was thinking how ironic it was. The RAP tax is 1/10 of 1%. Well, we're going to look at these rates here in a minute, and these are they impact our residents a lot more significantly than a RAP tax would. And so I think that can't be understated. So as part of this year's budget, the administration proposed 5-year rate increases. They did so on water, wastewater, stormwater, sanitation. Energy just did it for this year only, and I asked Travis Ball what he would expect going forward. He said about up with inflation. So we've included that in there, that assumption that they would raise rates based on inflation and energy. But the majority of our discussion today is actually going to be based on water and wastewater, because those are the two that are being increased the most. Last year, and I don't know how much you remember this, we didn't do we did a brief summary, but we didn't do a detailed report on the rate increases that were proposed as a part of last year's budget. Those, and you can't see this bottom line here very well, but $43.12 from fiscal year 15 to fiscal year 19 is what was proposed and what you adopted last year as a part of the budget. And again, I put energy in there at $1.50 for 2% inflation. What was proposed this year is that's when Public Works, Dave Decker, made his presentation at your work session earlier this month. And the largest increases, as you'll see on the next slide, are water and wastewater. But the total for the 5-year period from FY16, which is this year's budget, to FY20, so over the 5 years, it's $65.56. And this chart is on page 5 of your reports. You can follow along or just look up here. But $65.56 over a 5-year period. Add that to the $7 that was raised last year, and you're getting over $72 in a 6-year period that you're raising rates on the average household. Now, Larry made a good point that the average household isn't everyone, right? Some people might be, it might be more than $72 or the $65 for the next 5 years. Some it may be lower, but this is the average household.
Remind us again what that means.
What the average household means? I don't know, Dave, if you can.
Is that based on?
I just think it's an average amount of households and the average rate, but I'm not 100% sure.
What we typically have done in the presentations that we've made, we have looked at our average water consumption and said, this is what we're going to consider in Public Works as an average household.
I see.
And so it's based on consumption of water primarily.
Not on property value or home, okay. Average consumption.
Average
Okay.
water consumption.
And for the other rates?
Yeah, because many of the other rates, like stormwater, it's fixed for a residential home. It won't vary. In wastewater, we do have a consumption rate with wastewater also, but we had to pick one of those and say this is going to be your average bill for the Public Works utilities. So wastewater and water probably aren't quite the same, but they're very, very close as far as your average billing.
Thank you. This chart that you'll find on page 5 as well shows the difference. So this is the difference between what you as a council adopted last year and what is proposed this year. So for 16, you can see the differences. For FY20, we wanted to try to make it on a 5-year period, so we just took fiscal year 19, what they had proposed last year, and just carried that over to 20, and that's how we got those there. But it's an overall $21.05 increase for the 5 utilities on an average household, more than what they proposed last year. So the biggest changes were in water and wastewater. If we go back to the previous slide, $7 in water, $12 in wastewater. The other 3 are less than $1 change. Excuse me. So in the report, we mainly focused on water and wastewater, but we did talk about the others as well. The biggest change, and these graphs look familiar to you because they're the ones that Dave Decker presented at the work session meeting retreat, but it shows the breakout of what that difference includes. So just to go over real quick, operating expenditures, That's everything from personnel to O&M, and so just all the operating. CIP, it went up a little bit. General fund transfer, that's your 11% transfer that whenever they raise revenue, they have to account for that going to the general fund. Fund balance is 223, and then the rate delay is what Dave Decker explained, that they started it 2 months later last year than expected, and so that cost $200,000. And in wastewater, you can see so these pie charts, and they're found on page 7 and 8 of your reports, shows the breakdown from the previous slide for water and wastewater, where remember, this is just the increase. So it's not the full $65, it's just the $21. And in water and wastewater, that's $19.46 of the $21.05. So that's where that's being proposed with the dollar amount associated with those, with each one. The dollar amount represents how much a resident would pay over the 5-year period. So that's a little bit of the background. The objectives, we see 2 main competing objectives that the council has stated in policy. The first objectives, and these come from Vision 2030. First one, provide residents, businesses, educational institutions, and industries with reliable, low cost, and the reason utilities is in brackets is because Vision 2030 actually says energy costs. But as a part of our report, we're taking that to mean all utilities. Now, if that's not the case for the council, then you can decide that. But low cost utilities, and there's other places where it states that too. The second one is maintain the current high quality of Provo's utility systems. And so sometimes those objectives can be competing because we want to have high quality system, but we also want to keep rates low. And so I'll go into the alternatives. And again, as Bryce said in his report, this isn't an exhaustive list. There certainly can be more, but these are the ones that we thought were most viable. You've seen this chart before many times. Every time Public Works makes a presentation, they show this chart, so I think you should be very familiar with it. That's where Provo is, third from the bottom, after the fiscal year 16 rate increases is where they would be. And so alternative number 1 is a proposed, adopt the proposal as is. How far that'll take us up on the line would be yet to be seen based on what other cities do. However, if you look, and we're just over 1,500, if you take that $65 over 12 months, that would put us somewhere in this range if no other cities did any. And so just so you're aware of that. Alternative number 2, adopt the proposal for 1 year. And so what this entails is there's some things that had some suggestions. We had a meeting with Public Works, and they made some suggestions of things that can be done to maybe lower the utility rate increase over time. So this proposal would say, okay, we'll accept the rates for this year, the $15 in rate increases for this year. However, before we adopt the rest of the 4 years, we would like some things to be done. We've already talked about, go ahead.
The question on that, don't we do that anyway when we do the budget? I mean,
right.
So we adopt it. Isn't alternative 2 the same as alternative 1? Because we basically have to do it every year anyway.
Right. The difference with alternative 1 would be you're saying that these things have to be done before next year, before we'll consider the rate increases next year. Also, when you've done it in the past, like last year you accepted the 5-year plan that they had, well, they're going forward saying this is our 5-year plan, right? Because the council has endorsed it. They've said we're going to do it. However, if you just do 1 year and say we're not accepting the rest of the 4 years until some of these things have been done, then you're kind of sending that message. But you're correct. Every year you have to adopt the rates as part of the budget. So one of the things, as you saw from the graphs, the pie charts, the operating costs were a large chunk of this increase, of the $21 increase. And there are, as we talked with Public Works and Finance, there are some potentials where there's some potential where that could actually be lowered. One example would be the retirement system. That's actually, because their analysis is based off of what's been done in past years. However, that's going to raise at a lesser rate. And so that's a potential where there might be some savings going into future years. And I'll skip to this one because we've already talked about it. That the socioeconomic report is what Larry Walters was talking about. And so, raising the rates for this year, but saying before we go any further, the next 4 years, let's see what that report comes back and tells us. Base rate by meter size. That has to do with charging people based on how large their meter is, and I'm not sure all the ins and outs of that, but it's a suggestion that Public Works made that it's a more fair way of allocating costs. Explore a tiered block rate system, and that goes along with the socioeconomic report that Larry was saying, because as he was saying, what he would want to come out of that would be kind of a tiered block rate system where if you use less water, you pay less. So you can actually control those costs a little bit better. And then alternatives to the current list of CIP projects. You could potentially have Public Works say, prioritize what are the top CIP projects and see if you can have some savings there by not doing some of the lower priority projects. Alternative 3, status quo. So that would be just maintain the changes that you approved last year, the 5-year plan you approved last year, but don't approve any additional increases. Don't approve the $21.05. That would put a serious strain on Public Works, especially the operating budget. You saw that was a large chunk of the increase, and they may have to prioritize their needs and cut out some of their projects in order to still meet their needs, but that's definitely an option. Alternative 4, suspend or decrease the utility transfer. I don't know how many of you have studied the budget, but if you go to the back, I can't remember what page it's on, but Finance over the last few years has been doing a 10-year projection in their budget. And if you remember the 10-year projection I did and the 10-year projection they've done from past years, the gap is always like 1 year out, we already have a gap, right? Well, in this year's 10-year, you'll see that we actually don't have a gap, and we even have a surplus up until 2021. And that's largely because of the increase in utility transfer to the general fund, right? And so one of your options would be to, and we've had discussions before on whether or not you subscribe to this theory, but one of the comments that's been made is having a gap is a healthy thing. It helps us be more efficient and try to cut costs, right? Well, one of the options you could do is say, well, let's place a hold on the utility transfer, right? $1 million of the additional revenue that they need to raise is going straight to the general fund, right? If we say put a hold on that, raise rates by a little bit less, that could save the residents some money. So it's $1 million in water, about $500,000, just under $500,000 in wastewater. So that's an option. Now, as you're reading the report, that can be a headache, a financial headache. I know we've talked to John Denise about that, and that can really be hard to manage and do that way. But it is an option. The other one would be to decrease the utility transfer. One of the things that the council did 2 years ago as part of the road funding option was raise it from 10% to 11%. That 1% is going to roads right now. If you decreased it back to 10% and said, well, we have the utility transportation fund now, let's just true that up so that all our road maintenance is being funded out of that, and we could decrease this transfer back to 10%.
wasn't that rate on the utility transit, it was set also in conjunction with having the money that was included in that 1% increase. So if we'd have to increase the fund to make up the difference if we dropped it back
That's
to
what I'm
10%.
saying, yeah.
Okay.
Or, as I also state in the report, the state has passed some of these road funding, additional road funding, things that are, that the county might put on the ballot and so on. But that's an option as well. Alternative number 5 would be not doing some of the projects that they have listed. CIP, as I stated before, you could have them prioritize and not do some of the lower priority lists of CIP needs. That would put a strain on the system, but it would raise rates at a lower rate. Or there's a big chunk of their funding is going to the ERP and the fleet. And we'll talk more, at least we have a report coming out on the fleet facility. But $2 million of the $4 million for the fleet facility is coming out of rates. So rates are being increased to fund that. And then the other $2 million is coming out of the general fund, mostly out of fund balance. But if you were to say, now, we've all seen pictures of the fleet facility, and we know how much of a need it is for it to be repaired. But if you postpone that or looked into some other options, you could maybe save some money there. The Provo 360, the ERP, is another big chunk of what the utility rate increase is going to fund. And that could be suspended for a few years while residents catch up. With these utility rate increases. Now, with that option, a lot of time and money has already been put into that, so you'd have some costs there.
So Ryan, is alternative 5 is not the same as alternative 3, status quo.
Right.
It's to just do a smaller
increase. Okay. Not doing some of the projects that they have on there, but
Still be an increase.
Yeah. Then alternative 6. Like I said at the beginning, we actually didn't go through and study what all the rate increases were for last year when they proposed the $45, I think it was. And so alternative 6 would be to go back and do an analysis on the entire $65 instead of just the $21 that we've done in this report. So that would take more time and maybe be a part of next year's budget if you opt to do that. So that brings us to this last slide again, where we want to have you have discussion about this. Again, the main question that we try to ask, or we want at least you to be thinking about as we do these reports is, is this proposal a reasonable interpretation of how to best execute council policies and objectives? And it kind of depends on what policy or objective you're looking at in some instances, because as we stated, one thing that Vision 2030 says is we need to maintain our utility system. Another thing says is we value low rates, and so that's something that we wanted to discuss and decide. So I'm open to any questions, and I want to open it up to discussion and hear what you have to say.
So last year we looked ahead 5 years and we projected about a $43 increase over that period. And now we're looking at about an increase about 50% higher than that.
Right.
Could you just summarize what the unanticipated things were and roughly how much they contribute to that?
Yep. So that's what these pie charts are. Well, that's what these two charts are. So the operating expenditures, especially in these first 2 years, so the fleet facility of the 15.2 million there, the fleet facility is taking up, I don't know, in these two, probably just over $1 million. Then you have the ERP in there as well. And then as Dave Decker explained, one of the reasons the operating expenditures is so much larger than originally anticipated was because the way it was calculated in their master plan when they did it, they made it look like it was going to go down, but they didn't have a full understanding of what was incorporated in operating costs, and they were actually going up. And so it made it change from, and you might have to help me here, Jimmy, from $75,000 increase a year to 300,000?
95 to 300.
To what?
95,000 to 300.
So $95,000 increase per year to $300,000 increase per year. So the operating expenditures is the main chunk of this. And then some CIP needs are there too, and I don't know if Dave, you can elaborate on what the specific CIP cost increase was for exactly.
In water, there was 2 significant CIP projects. If you remember, we talked about the original plan had a second bond proposed. I think it was in FY 17 or 18, and we changed the CIP plan. Instead of doing that bond, we started saving money instead of doing a bond payment. And that difference, we started saving 1 fiscal year earlier, and so a big chunk of that CIP is just that difference alone, because we started saving for the project 1 year earlier. There was also a couple of other CIP changes. Remember, we started saving for a tank replacement. We added that also into the CIP. So again, instead of having to bond or anticipate a bond maybe 10, 15 years out to replace 3 of our oldest tanks in the city, we started saying, let's start saving some money, setting it aside so that we don't have to bond even maybe 10 years down the road to replace those tanks.
Thank you. And then the general fund transfer accounts for just under $1.5 million of the increase. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Remind me how much is going to ERP?
I can't remember. Do you have that?
Jimmy, do you have it or do I need to?
Yeah, I'd have to look into that further. Sorry.
And are they all paying a portion of that? I mean, all
Yes.
the whole city that uses
Yes.
whatever, they all pay a certain portion to.
Yeah, they divvied it out similar to how they divvied the fleet facility out. Yeah, it's based on.
About 350,000 a year spread over all utilities.
Spread over all the utilities?
All 4 public works utilities.
So, okay.
So water, wastewater.
So 1.4 million, but that's between the 4 utilities.
So it's 350,000 overall, the utilities, or you said?
350 per year, right?
Per year.
And energy has the same amount.
Yeah.
So 450 for energy and then 350 for all public works.
For 2 years for the fleet, right?
Yeah,
2 years for the fleet.
And when they came and presented, they said that they didn't include, there's something that they needed to connect with the ERP to their metering system, if I remember right, and they didn't have that yet, didn't have it included in this amount. Is that correct? So this isn't the total number, is what I'm getting at, for the ERP, to be able to connect, make those connections.
My understanding, this
is not the total
number includes being able to work with their automated meters and it's the full number.
Okay, they did say they needed the this is the number.
I can check on that further, but I've been heavily involved with that. I'm not aware of that, but I'll check further and let you know.
We see that once again the 5-year or perhaps the 6-year projection of the annual increase.
It's that one right there. I don't know if you can read these numbers, but it's also on page 5 of your report.
And so next year, is that the year lower than this year?
Yeah, so this year is 1537, next year is 1261, 1238, 1282, 1238. So that means 12 something.
And this is a question back here. Would your plans change if the council said, okay, we're going to look at this again next year? If we approve it, what changes would happen in your moving forward if we didn't just say, okay, we're looking at the 5 years right now, we're making that decision, or if we just reviewed it annually, does it make much difference to you?
I don't think, to me, it makes much difference. In fact, when we did our plan last year, we had anticipated, even in the discussions with the administration, we knew that we would have to go back each of those 5 years, review where we were at, what we were doing right, if there were things that needed to be changed. So I'm anticipating needing to come back next year. Not that there's going to be significant CIP changes or operation changes. I think it's just healthy to have that discussion and just say, here's where we're at each year. I don't anticipate significant changes. The only thing that I would caution in coming back, and I think one of those proposals was to adopt the increase and then not to adopt the other 4 years. One thing that you have to remember is we did do a bond last year, and we have an obligation to pay for that bond each year, and so some of the rate increases that were presented last year are consistent with that bond payment.
It strikes me that the department head would be foolish to make any kind of assumption of guarantee beyond the current fiscal year. And so it almost has to be framed. I mean, this is a kind of what I hope would happen over the long term, but I'm only planning for the current year.
I agree.
So the swallow will be hardest this year.
Yeah, the largest increases this year.
If we can trust that inflation is coming back, then what's being projected for the following years will not be nearly the hard swallow, especially 4 or 5 years out.
Right. Yeah, it stays at 12.
Except that, a question with that, if inflation is coming back and the swallow won't the costs increase, and we may have to revisit those rate increases.
I don't know. I don't know how these were calculated.
Do these include inflation?
We did put a small inflation factor into the CIP, is it?
That was part of the change. The change from last year's proposal to this year is an operating side, is that the inflation factor we put in last year only added about 95,000 a year. So we've increased that up to 300,000 a year based on what we've seen recently.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
At least they're considering some of that already, so that's good.
Well, our presentation's called Fun with Funding, but I feel like I just delivered like some really bad news and everyone's a little gloomy.
Yeah, don't count on it going viral.
I don't know how much fun we're having, but anyway. We like to open up to discussion and hear what each of you have to say. Or if it's just, let's just go ahead and do it, then that's fine as well. So if there are other alternatives that you've thought of.
Can I speak to the budget committee? If you'd like to.
That's
Here.
Would it be helpful to have input from our Citizens Budget Committee to the council?
I think it would be helpful to have input from George.
Okay.
But I'm not necessarily as the budget committee, and I appreciate that.
Just one member.
Yeah, that's what I think we need to make sure that we. But I do appreciate his opinion, and I think it would be valuable.
George?
I don't know, you're going to create opposition when you give a 5-year projection that has to be renewed annually anyway. So why do a 5-year projection? I mean, it might not be what you think it's going to be. And you're going to create automatic opposition. You're going to say we're going to increase it $75 over 5 years. Or maybe you won't be increasing $75 over 5 years. I just think you're going to have opposition that would not be there if you do it year by year. Because it has to be done year by year anyway.
It may be helpful for internal purposes, but it shouldn't be externalized.
No, I don't think so. I wouldn't externalize it as a politician. Because it could change. We don't know what's gonna happen.
And I appreciate that. There's one little concern is, are we being as upfront and transparent? Well, you talked about $15 this year, now you're coming to get me again? Well, really, we kind of had it in the plan that we thought that might happen. That's my only concern, is I just don't want to be caught up in a year later and says, will you promise us something else? Because I will hear that.
Well, if you promise that it's gonna drop down to 1261 the next year, we kind of are. Isn't that the next?
Well, but that's sort of all the more reason than not to present the long-range projection.
You know, it's necessary, we're gonna have to do what we're gonna have to do, but you don't know year by year what you're gonna have to do, quite frankly. Just look at the change from last year to this year. It's certainly different than you thought it was gonna be.
Well, thanks a lot, Dave. My own sense is, once again, and I'll sing the chorus, even though the verse may be different, and that is, we're looking at what appear to be dramatic increases for the so-called average household, but only because of what has been deferred for so long. There is a time when the piper has to be paid, ultimately, and this will help us pay that piper and then anticipate more productively the future infrastructure needs.
And it also, that is one thing that George has taught me, it's important to stay within a certain realm of being competitive with our other communities. Even with these rates, we are still very competitive.
Yeah, I mean, what Ryan showed us early on struck me as being entirely compatible with the objectives of Vision 2030. We're upgrading our infrastructure substantially and still staying far to the right of the distribution for the communities, comparable communities, or neighboring communities.
You can project your increases without knowing what the others are. You don't know that comparative. If you're doing it year by year, you can just see where your comparative is going to be with other cities, because they're doing theirs as you go along. Right now, you have to say, well, this might put us here against the others. You don't know. They might increase faster than us. We'll be very competitive 5 years down the road. We might be where we are today. But right now, you can't say that because you don't know what they're going to do.
And then again, I go back to the only thing I'm concerned about, well, this year we're going to put in the line. And next year we're going to put in the tank that's going to hold the water that's going to feed that line. Well, we'll stop. Are we going to stop right there if we do, all of a sudden we find out we've just got a line in the ground? And are we, when we put a line in the ground, are we making a commitment through a tank? That's something that I wonder about, and just being honest with the people.
What if the future council reduces the transfer, leaves the money in the fund to do it? No, increases rates.
Increases the transfer?
Decreases.
What if the future council decreases the transfer?
Four. Option
And budget
4.
that way rather than the rate increase.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing other ideas to the table too, because it gives me pause to think that we're gonna, and then again, increase it that much more, because I felt like the first increase was wow, you know, for some households, that's gonna be wow. And so, is an ERP system necessary? Absolutely. Do we have to have it? And do we know it's going to do all that it should do for us? I mean, I didn't ask enough questions. I don't think about that. I'm just thinking about it. And is that something that we have to do now? Or the fleet facility, obviously it's a need, but can we throw that burden on the taxpayer right now? Or can we put, you know, are there projects, are there other ways of doing this, of decreasing the transfer, or, you know, with if that tax goes through. You know, there are other things that we might be able to do to help sort of ease into this need, rather than just, you know, 5 years from now, everyone really feeling it. So I appreciate you bringing other ideas and options, and I guess I would look to Dave as well to see if there are other other ways of softening the blow, so to speak, you know. There are other things that we can do to not feel this type of an impact so quickly, I guess.
The way I would answer that question, it goes back to the two changes that I mentioned in the CIP. One of the immediate ways, and what we've seen in the trend over the last 10 years is, because rates have not increased substantially, our transfer to the CIP was diminishing. That's where they were making up that funding differences. They were just doing less and less CIP projects. So that's traditionally where a utility will turn and say, do we decrease the CIP projects? And that's where I would answer here again, if you wanted to make immediate changes to the CIP, instead of saving for that project, that aqueduct, the 48-inch aqueduct in fiscal year 17 or 18, you could move that back 1 year. You could diminish the amount that we save each year. What that does is it starts to impact our ability to do that CIP project. And that's really what I'm hearing some of the councils say is, you know, that's kind of that competing interest. How much do we soften the blow, but what does it impact us? You know, how does it impact us long term to do those projects that we know are going to come up?
No, that's your first.
That's the easiest. That's the first one that we would go to is CIP projects, adjustments.
Because you don't control the ERP, that's sort of placed on you, that you don't really have control over that.
It's a much bigger project. It impacts the entire city.
Right. And the fleet facility, I guess, is other entities are impacted by that as well.
Yeah, the fleet facility services all the vehicles in the city. And so again, it's a department, or it's a citywide. Yes, the fleet is under a public works operation, and it's certainly a need, but it impacts the entire city also.
I think these are great questions, and suppose we do reduce the transfer. Okay, that's great, and we're going to take that money out of the general fund to pay for some of these things. We got to look at the next question. What are we going to do to replace that money in the general fund to fund the policemen that we're going to be taking, that we took out? So it's a never-ending process, you know, and it's something maybe we're going to look at every year and decide where we're going to go with it. I appreciate the challenges that we're looking forward to.
Yeah, that's, you know, as we did this report, we just tried to throw out anything that we could think, you know, and these alternatives, we're not necessarily saying they're good or bad, we're just trying to throw everything out there so that then we can analyze every possible option.
The risk that we take in making this available publicly is it owes to the misconception on the part of the citizen that the die is cast. That what we have decided on this year in terms of the increase then necessitates the increases in the following years. That isn't the case at all. But helping people understand that we know is very difficult to accomplish. And so at most we could just simply say our decision about this year was in the context of this kind of projection, but nothing binds future councils.
I appreciate that.
And just be grateful we didn't settle on the whole 65 this year. As a hedge against future councils.
Can I share one thought on the transfer?
Please.
Probably of all, and I think this has been really good, and I really believe that it's critical that you don't have sacred cows and you look at all options. I think what the council staff proposed here is excellent. But the thing that concerns me the most is levelizing the transfer. And I would much prefer to actually lower the transfer rate and make changes to deal with that than just levelize it. And the reason that it concerns me is that, like it or not, one of the largest revenue sources in the general fund are transfers from the enterprise funds. And if you levelize that source, we have costs that go up each year. Some examples, of course, would be our payroll-related costs related to being competitive on our wages, related to step increases, also state retirement increases. You may have heard, but legislation passed in this last legislative session, a change on dispatchers to be part of the police retirement system. And we're still working through those issues, but if that happens like we think it will, that's going to be a significant hit in cost for us in the retirement. It'll help us retain dispatchers, but it'll rise costs. How do we pay for that? Some other examples, we've talked about, and the committee's brought up challenges with vehicle funding. We haven't been adequately replacing our vehicles and maintaining them. And I think that's another way we're trying to catch up with that. Also, we talked about police officers, and there was a study done on the need to have additional police officers, and also as we look at impacts from inflation and how they affect overall costs. So all those things have to be weighed in, and if we were just merely to levelize the transfer, then you would likely have to be doing some other things in the general fund that would likely decrease funding in police, fire, and parks. They're the three biggest areas, and so I just think it's important to understand that as we make changes, there are other consequences, and so something to be aware of.
Essentially, it becomes like property tax, right? It's been level for years.
Yeah, and that's another option, would be to levelize transfer, but then increase property taxes. And then that brings on a whole other equation of who's paying those costs and who's not, and how the residents are going to respond to that. So it's just, you guys have a tough job.
Rates are more responsive, in my mind, to inflation than property tax. And so I think that's been our hedge that other communities have not had in fighting the inflation bite that we've had to deal with.
We also have the added consideration in this community of the remarkably high proportion of property owners who do not pay property tax, but do pay utility rates, that is, utility fees.
Does it show in here what the base rate is? In other words, that $15 increase for the first year, what percentage increase is that?
What percentage is it over what it was? So it was $9 when you approved it last year, and now it's $15.
But that $9 is an increase, right?
Yes.
So this $15 increase on the average household, what's the average bill?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I don't have that information. I don't know if you have that. Like, what's the average bill right now?
Was it around 78?
That's the chart of the other cities.
Yeah.
Right.
It was on that.
Oh.
But what's the average monthly?
It's $78.
That's what I said.
So after the council adopted last year's increases that we recommended, the 4 public works utilities went to $78.09.
So that's just the public works one. So if you take that in,
Not including energy.
It'd be $13 is what they're. So 75 divided by 13. Yeah.
He's talking about energy. Just so you're aware, at the UMPA meeting last night, they approved it. They actually UMPA came back with a 3.2 rate increase, but they changed it and asked to reduce the reserves. And so they're going to maintain a 3% increase on our utility rates for this time. It will decrease our rate equalization fund slightly, but that was voted on by the mayors last night.
And the rate equalization fund is a fund that we have been saving as a city. You're talking about the city?
No, UMPA's
or UMPA's
rate stabilization fund.
Okay.
That's just a sidelight as we're looking at other increases that are coming down the road in conjunction with the ones.
I thought it was at 3, and then they thought about going
They-
to
well,
2.2, and now they're back to 3 again.
Yeah, they did, they went to 3.2 because that's the way the budget came out. By the time they figured their costs, it ultimately came out to 3.2, that they needed to cover their costs. Instead, they decided to decrease the amount to the rate stabilization fund. And so there's, to maintain that 3% increase that they told the other cities that when we were at Zermatt, who had based all of their budget figures on a 3% rather than a 3.2%. It would have cost Provo City around $600,000 more had they adopted the 3.2% according to their budget and kept the rate equalization the same.
I guess we would just look, if we don't hear anything, or if there's no motion, then we'll just assume that you're adopting this as part of the budget. But if there's something you want changed, then we would probably need to know that soon.
Probably.
At least
This would have pretty significant impacts throughout the budget. And
Right.
so, to be fair to the Finance and Public Works Division that make changes, you probably need to know if you're going to make a change by the conclusion of your first public hearing on Tuesday. So they could go to work on that.
And it might be helpful to consider this in the context of our next item as well, which is the Council Budget Committee update. So if there aren't any other comments or questions, Dave?
Just one other comment. If you look at this as a percentage increase, it's very uneven. It's about a 19.7% increase this year. And then it drops to a 13.5% increase the following year. So I'm just wondering if, as a minimum, we can try to smooth this out a little bit. It's about a half, 19%, it just seems like a very big jump in 1 year.
I'd like to hear how that would affect, again, their plans for this coming year. If they did take it, smooth it out too much here.
What we did is we looked at the comparison, some of those charts that Jimmy uses. In the long-term funding, if you remember, our fund balance in many of the funds drop very close. We're down in the $500,000 range in some of the funds as far as our fund balance. And what we're trying to do is accomplish CIP projects plus maintain our fund balance. And so if we decrease the amount of revenue that we get early in the years, it impacts later, 3 or 4 years later, it will actually decrease our fund balance. So the quicker that we react to the financial needs in the early years, it smooths out or it helps us longer term. We definitely could allow that to be smoother, but what it will do is in FY19 and FY20, it starts to impact our fund balance, and we get even closer to a 0 point in the fund balance. It would essentially force us to say, we're going to have to cut something in order to maintain some fund balance. Not do the savings for the tank, or not do the savings for the 48-inch aqueduct. Again, it's kind of the same question that was asked before. What would we cut if we wanted to reduce the rate? And it would likely be CIP projects. I do have to say one other thing. There was a question that I probably didn't answer quite the way I wanted to, relative to cutting CIP projects. We do recognize in the proposal we're trying to compensate for CIP projects that are needed immediately, plus a longer-term issue. We've recognized a couple of issues in those trends that I mentioned over the last 10 years. And we're really trying to do two things here. It's immediate CIP needs, plus we're saying we're going to need to replace 48-inch aqueduct, 3 tanks that are going to be needed in the next 10 years. And so some of the significant changes that you see on CIP are really trying to compensate for two different things. Immediate CIP plus about 10 years out, we're going to start to see CIP needs show up. And so it's a dual effect right now. It's we're trying to anticipate existing project needs and future project needs all in one plan.
It sounds like it's more of a plan to pay as you go rather than going up bond.
That's what that's the hope. And I know it's a huge impact, especially in the early years. It makes a big difference. And I know from the political side, that's not easy to convince voters and residents to understand that. But the plan right now prevents bonding in the future. That is one of the major significant changes that we have done in the CIP is we're saying, let's start saving money now for tanks for the aqueduct instead of bond 2 or 3 years down the road, plus probably another one 10 years down the road for tanks. If we don't start saving for tanks now, how do we pay for a tank 10 years from now that's going to cost, in today's dollar, it's probably going to be about $5 million. We won't have the money to replace that concrete tank.
Ouch.
It's hard news. I know I recognize it's a dual effect here of what we're trying to accomplish, and it's one of the significant changes in the CIP.
I think that's an attitude change that we're dealing with in our city right now. And it's painful, but I think it's probably a good thing to have to face.
I think as a council, that's what we've requested, and now we're getting kind of what we've requested. So we're kind of like,
you asked for it, man.
Feel like we requested.
It's a blend, pay as you go with save as you go.
Yeah, save as you go, yeah.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Appreciate your work on this and your presentation. And Bryce, I'm not sure I adequately thanked you either for your presentation on the RAP tax. A lot of time and effort put into both of those. Thank you. Kim and Gary, we know the budget committee met yesterday. Is there an update you'd like to, so we put this on the agenda in case there's something you'd like to share.
We did. We actually, John and Denise have been very generous with their time and went through 50 questions
Wow.
and answers with the budget committee on the current proposed budget. We are not prepared to give an evaluation of any type yet. We're still working on that. As a sideline, we're working on the guiding principles that the council has tasked us to complete, and Dave Sewell has come up with sort of a easier read version, and he brought that to the council or to the committee yesterday, and we looked at that and compared notes, and we're trying to find a happy medium where it's maybe a little bit easier to read, but it also has all the meat in it. And I think we're almost there. We're very close, so we should be able to bring that to the council. If not this next meeting, the following. I think we decided on the 16th to bring that to the council. I think that's important that we're all on the same page. If it's something that we end up adopting, I think it's very valuable to have the guiding principles that are going to help us move through that fee discussion moving forward. But the intent statements have been done, and I think we will have those ready as well. And we've just had great discussions with John and Denise. I don't know if you have something you would like to add, or there are some things that we've been able to find. George has asked some very good questions as well, and we've been able to make some recommendations, just not really recommendations, but I think in these conversations, John and Denise have found there are ways to make it a little easier to understand as well, the document. But
yeah, and I haven't asked Larry, but I would imagine he probably spent probably 6 or 8 hours on this budget document, maybe even more, going through and asking good questions. And I was very impressed with the questions, the good dialogue, and Denise and I spent a fair amount of time going through and responding to those, but they were great. And so other than that, we're happy to share anything, but hopefully we'll be able to respond to those questions.
Yeah, and once we can get sort of a cohesive list, or get the answers right, we'll give those to the council, all the questions and the answers that we've received. I don't have them written out well enough to send those out to council members yet, but when we have that together, we can give that to everyone, because they are really good questions, and maybe some of the same questions as you go through the document. You may have some of those. I mean, I don't think on Larry's level at all, so I'm grateful that he did the work. But I think some of these things will come up as we're studying the document, and so we'll definitely make sure everybody has a copy of those as soon as they're ready to be sent out.
Okay. Questions, and I love the response. And John, at least those responses are written. Show them that, Kim, that document. Look at this.
It's 12 pages.
It's 12 pages.
It's
but
50 questions.
Yeah, it's amazing that you look at the black questions and the red answers, and that was so helpful.
And mine is well used, so.
I just think that's been so helpful to us.
It's a pretty healthy question and answer series, and we just appreciate their willingness to answer those questions and to work through some of those.
The other thing I would add too is, through some of the questions and dialogue, we're going to be making they're minor changes, but they're good changes in the final budget document. One of them is chargebacks. What we've done historically is we've included in our chargebacks and other category utilities and some other things, and we're going to pull those utilities out up into operating expenses so that chargebacks should buy themselves. And we think that's going to provide better information, less of a big glob down at the bottom that nobody understands. And so that's just an example of some areas where we've been able to get good feedback and make some enhancements to the budget document so it'll be better for the council and the residents.
And there will be a couple of detailed documents in the appendix.
Yes.
Road funding is probably one of the biggest.
Yeah, you'll be
Working on a format for that.
Yeah, one place where it takes our separate funds and then shows what the total amount is spent on roads. You can look at each of the projects, and that way it's not as confusing, a little bit more understanding for the state readers to see. And Denise has done a fantastic job putting that together. And of course, Larry's had some good input, so it's been good.
Well, that sounds good. That will be very helpful to have. Appreciate that. A lot of work there.
One comment. I don't know if any of you have watched the programs that have been done on the constitutional debates between them and the Declaration of Independence. It's really interesting to me to see all the arguing, discussion that went on some of those things. I think there's a lot that's happened in this committee that has done the same thing, and I'm really excited to bring forward this document for guiding principles and intent statements in the council. I think we've had a lot of discussion back and forth, and it did remind me a lot of those debates at that time. It was good. It's a good experience.
We've also had some discussion about the guiding principles that the administration, they have their own financial principles in the document, and there was some discussion about whether we are adopting those with the budget or if we should have those separate from the budget. We also talked about the 2030, Vision 2030 goals, and deciding if the budget meets our goals, and have those 2030 goals that are the council goals that we're trying to move forward. Does the budget meet our goals as a council? And so being able to have that discussion, if we feel that the budget, the current proposed budget, is meeting the goals that we have set forth as a council, and are those goals, are we clear on what 2030 goals we want included? The entire document is included, and some apply and some don't, and so there may be some merit in going through some of those and deciding which goals we want to include that we will complete with this year's budget, and having the departments do that. Some have done that. I think Parks and Rec, or maybe it was the utility. I saw that the goals that they are have been included in our staff reports, the 2030 goals are included in that. But just going through that list of goals, finding if this really is moving our goals forward is part of the conversation that we've had as a committee. Trying to think what else.
We're looking forward to the discussion that Larry's going to present to us. That'll be, I think that'll, for recommendations. One thing I think that this committee has recognized, and we want to make sure that we're doing as the council wishes, is that we come forward with recommendations. We've learned that we don't always agree. We're going to take a vote and we'll pass something and give a recommendation. This committee has literally worked so hard in discussing so many options and consequences of decisions that are made. And I think when we bring something to the council, this is a recommendation, and know that there are, and if you would like us to talk about some of the things we discussed and why we turned down some things, we can do that. But this is a recommendation that we'll feel comfortable with when it comes forward. We feel it's the best work that we can do.
Great. We'll look forward to discussing that further then. Thank you. All right, well, we've covered the fourth item already earlier in our discussion when Mr. Walters was here. So having gone through our agenda, I'll look for a motion to adjourn our meeting at this time. Kelly, motion to adjourn, and a second by Kim Santiago. Those in favor? Great. Thank you. And then we'll see you at work session next Tuesday. Do we have a time on that yet?
Plan on 1 o'clock for now.
Probably 1 o'clock. And Vice Chair Santiago will take the lead on that meeting, as I won't be in town that day. So, thanks again. Did we vote to adjourn?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was unanimous.
Nobody wanted to adjourn, Gary. What are you talking about?
Whatever you're confused with, Gary.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I can really.